Chapter 3065. On this day, outside the vermilion bird holy ground, fiery red birds flew in all directions and soared through the sky. Their clear cries resounded in all directions. The entire place was bright red. This kind of red was obviously filled with a festive color because today was a very festive day. It was the day the vermilion bird holy sun and the ancient phoenix divine maiden would become partners. The entire vermilion bird holy ground was meticulously decorated. Everywhere was fiery red, as if it was a world of fire, brimming with incomparable heat and vitality. Endless streams of guests came from all directions. The azure dragon holy ground's holy sun has arrived. A loud and long voice resounded in all directions, reverberating continuously. Everyone could hear it clearly. The vermilion bird holy ground had a person in charge of announcing the arrival of the holy sun. He would announce the arrival of the holy sun according to his identity. The guests would bring gifts, but the gifts would not be announced. After all, the value of a gift was sometimes difficult to measure. The same treasure had different meanings to different cultivators. Naturally, there would be a difference in value. Some gifts were indeed very precious. For example, supreme treasures were extremely precious to anyone. However, no one would treat a supreme treasure as a gift. Taking a step back, the value of a peak saint artifact was still astonishing. But, no matter how one put it, it was inevitable that there would be some differences in the value of the gifts given. In a situation where both parties had similar statuses, it was inevitable that there would be some differences in the value of the gifts given. The white tiger holy ground's holy sun has arrived. The black tortoise holy ground's holy sun has arrived. The three holy grounds were the same as the vermilion bird holy ground in the four-quadrant ancient region. The three holy suns came together to congratulate the vermilion bird holy ground. The holy sun and goddess of the two holy grounds were going to become partners. It was considered a big event. Every holy ground that received an invitation would send people over. Moreover, the people sent were all Saint Realm experts. However, most of them were in the pristine Saint Realm. They would also bring a few more outstanding disciples from the holy ground. Under normal circumstances, a great Saint Realm expert would not personally attend such an occasion unless the vermilion bird holy sun was already a great Saint Realm expert. However, he obviously wasn't. Therefore, he did not have the prestige to have a great Saint Realm expert personally attend to him. As for giving face to the vermilion bird holy ground, the great Saint Realm's status was extremely high. It was only second to the divine ancestor. It was normal for them not to give face to any holy ground. Saint Chongfeng has arrived. The announcement rang out continuously, resounding through the sky and reverberating endlessly. If it was a saint from a holy land, the title of the holy land would be mentioned, but if it wasn't a saint from a holy land, it would be directly reported to the saint. This meant that the saint was most likely a rogue cultivator. There was another possibility, and that was if it was an expert from a peak heaven-grade force. For example, if the lightning sword sage of the lightning sword sect came, the person who reported would be the lightning sword sage, and not the lightning sword sect. This was also the pride of the holy land. If it wasn't a holy land, the other forces were still lacking. The sword saint of the 10,000 swords peak has arrived. Exclamations immediately rang out in the surroundings. After all, the myriad swords mountain could be considered a peak existence among the sacred ground. It could be considered as one of the top 3 sacred grounds. No, it could even be considered as the second sacred ground, second only to one of the 5 sacred grounds in the mysterious heavens ancient region. The Starry Sword Palace's Flying Star Sword Saint has arrived. The next announcement rang out, but the commotion it caused was not as great as that of the 10,000 Swords Peak. The Vermilion Bird Holy Land was unprecedentedly lively because in the past, it was extremely rare for so many saint-level experts to gather here, even if they were only pristine saint. Pristine saint level was extremely high for many cultivators. For cultivators, it was already a peak existence. It was the goal they pursued all their lives. Most cultivators couldn't reach that level. People from the Holy Lands came one after another, and rogue cultivators and saint-level experts came one after another. Every single one of them brought a gift as a congratulatory gift. The value of the gift was not low, at least for saint-level experts. For cultivators below the saint level, it was a rare treasure. The saint from the mysterious heaven's ancient region has arrived. Suddenly, the announcement rang out. It dragged on for a long time, and it sounded even more resounding and resonant than the other announcements from before. What? Even the people from the mysterious heaven's ancient region have come? The Vermilion Bird Holy Land has gained a lot of face this time. Not only did the 10,000 Swords Peak send people here, even the mysterious heaven's ancient region has sent people here. Unbelievable. There were dozens of holy lands in the land region of the mysterious ancient world, but these holy lands were divided into strong and weak. The weakest holy lands were those without divine ancestors, and the strongest among them were only great saints. Such holy lands were called minor holy land. Above the minor holy lands were the great holy lands, which were powerful holy lands with divine ancestors. For example, the ancient Phoenix Mountain was a great holy land, and so was the Vermilion Bird Holy Land. Above the great holy lands there was another level, which was the ancient holy lands. The minor holy lands were the most common, followed by the great holy lands. Basically, the holy lands in the four great ancient regions were at least great holy land. As for the ancient holy lands, there were very few of them. There were only 3 of them, and they were the top 3 holy lands in the land region of the mysterious ancient world. These 3 ancient holy lands were the Jambu Palace, the 10,000 Swords Peak, and the mysterious heavens ancient region. Among them, the 10,000 Swords Peak could be said to be second or third, but because the Jambu Palace was more mysterious, there was no direct conclusion as to how strong it was. Therefore, it was hard to say whether the Jambu Palace was second or third, but the first was undoubtedly the mysterious heavens ancient region. The mysterious heavens ancient region was publicly recognized as the strongest existence among all the holy lands. They also had the deepest foundation and were the earliest holy lands in the mysterious ancient world. The Vermilion Bird Holy Land had sent an invitation to the mysterious heavens ancient region, but they didn't expect the mysterious heavens ancient region to send people over. Unexpectedly, the mysterious heavens ancient region actually sent people over. For a moment, the face of the person who made the announcement was flushed red. First, the 10,000 Swords Peak had sent people over, and now, the mysterious heavens ancient region had sent people over. This undoubtedly caused a great commotion. The people of the Vermilion Bird Holy Land were very proud. Their backs seemed to straighten as they felt proud from the bottom of their hearts. The Vermilion Bird Holy Land was only one of the great holy lands. It wasn't considered the top among the great holy lands. After a while, the announcement suddenly became louder, and the content of the announcement caused another commotion. Holy Sun Bai Fu from the Jambu Palace has arrived. What? Even people from the Jambu Palace have come. How is that possible? Everyone who heard the announcement was shocked. The Jambu Palace. The Jambu Palace could be said to be the most mysterious force in the mysterious ancient world. How many people were there? How many experts were there? For many cultivators, this was an unknown number. Even the location of the Jambu Palace was a great secret. Although the Vermilion Bird Holy Land had sent invitations to all the great holy lands, they hadn't sent them to the Jambu Palace. Because the Vermilion Bird Holy Land didn't know where the Jambu Palace was, they naturally couldn't send it. As such, it was normal that no one from the Jambu Palace would come. In fact, even if the Vermilion Bird Holy Land had successfully sent an invitation to the Jambu Palace, the Jambu Palace would most likely not send anyone. Who would have thought that the Jambu Palace would actually send someone over without an invitation? It was simply unbelievable. Holy Sun Bai Fu? They had never heard of him, but since he was called Holy Sun, it meant that he had an extraordinary status and strength in the Jambu Palace. The uninvited Holy Sun by Fu received a great reception. The people of the Vermilion Bird Holy Land warmly welcomed him in. This time, the reputation of the Vermilion Bird Holy Land, especially the Holy Sun, has greatly increased. Yes, who would have thought that the three great ancient Holy Lands would send someone here? This is unprecedented. Many people said one after another, and their tone was indescribably envious. In the world of experts there was a clear hierarchy. How was this hierarchy determined? There was no other reason, only strength. Strength was the pass. No matter what kind of background you had, as long as you had great strength, no one would dare to look down on you anywhere. Saint-level experts basically did not associate with those below the saint level because they did not belong to the same level. There was a great difference in the height and perspective of things. They were two completely different levels. There was no common language, and there was no communication or mutual benefit. That was the difference in cultivation level, and also the difference in life essence. Great saint-level experts basically did not associate with little saint-level expert. Although there was no difference in life essence, there was a clear gap in cultivation level. Similarly, divine ancestors would not associate with great saint-level experts and little saint-level expert. Ancient Holy Lands were stronger than Great Holy Lands. Ancient Holy Lands could completely ignore the invitation of Great Holy Lands, and Great Holy Lands would not say anything. That was very normal. On the contrary, if Ancient Holy Lands really responded, it would be a kind of honor. On the other hand, if small Holy Lands did not actively respond to the call of Great Holy Lands, they would be remembered. Strength. In the end, it was still strength. Finally, almost all the invited saint-level experts from the Holy Lands and independent cultivators had arrived at the Vermilion Bird Holy Land. The Holy Sun by Fu's spouse ceremony had also begun. The auspicious time has arrived. Please invite the Holy Sun by Fu and the ancient Phoenix Divine Maiden. A majestic voice suddenly rang out, surging through the sky and into everyone's ears. The spouse ceremony was held on a platform built on a huge open space in front of the Vermilion Bird Holy Land's main hall. This platform was called the Vermilion Phoenix Platform, and it was surrounded by experts who had come to congratulate and participate. In addition to the experts, there were naturally some outstanding disciples of the Holy Lands, as well as some saint-level independent cultivators' disciples, and so on. At a glance, there was a huge crowd, and it was very lively. Soon after, bird cries rang out in the sky, resonating through the 9 heavens. Swathes of red clouds rose up from a palace to the right. At a closer look, they were actually not red clouds, but birds. There were several hundred fiery red birds, rushing into the sky like a huge cloud of fire. The clear bird cries came from the mouths of these birds. Immediately after, the birds formed a long corridor that connected the palace to the sky altar in front of the Vermilion Bird main hall. A figure also appeared on the palace and appeared on the back of a bird. He stepped on the bird's back and walked over step by step. That person was wearing a bright red robe with golden embroidery. It looked very luxurious and noble, and it made his face look even more handsome. Chapter 3066. There were 2 halls on each side of the Vermilion Bird main hall. The Vermilion Bird Holy Sun came from the hall on the right, stepping on the long corridor formed by hundreds of huge flaming birds. He was the center of attention as soon as he appeared. At this moment, the Vermilion Bird Holy Sun was extremely dazzling. He was the main character of this moment. The Vermilion Bird Holy Sun had a smile on his face, and the light in his eyes was restrained. He looked humble, but he also had a natural pride, which made him even more extraordinary. Immediately, there was a clear cry from the hall on the left, and a fiery red color filled the sky. Hundreds of flaming birds soared into the sky, forming a flaming corridor in the air that led directly to the Vermilion Bird stage. 3 figures also appeared, standing side by side on the backs of flaming birds. The ancient phoenix divine maiden. At this moment, the ancient phoenix divine maiden was also dressed in a fiery red robe embroidered with golden patterns of a phoenix bathed in flames. She did not wear a veil on her face, and her face was completely revealed. Her expression was very calm, as if she did not care about anything. When she walked, she was supported by two maids. The vermilion bird holy sun. The ancient phoenix divine maiden. The couple ceremony had also begun. The so-called couple ceremony was about choosing a Tao companion. Seeing the ancient phoenix divine maiden walking over, the holy sun by Fu's eyes narrowed, and then a playful smile appeared on his face, as if he had discovered something. Other than the holy sun by Fu, there were also some other experts who seemed to have noticed something and felt puzzled. However, no one said anything, because in such an occasion, if they said anything, it would offend both the vermilion bird holy land and the ancient phoenix mountain. It was not a good thing. Of course, 4 powerful ancient holy lands like the Jambu Palace, 10,000 Swords Mountain, and Heavenly Mystery Sect, even if they offended the Vermilion Bird Holy Land and the Ancient Phoenix Mountain, the Vermilion Bird Holy Land and the Ancient Phoenix Mountain would not dare to say anything. The difference was too great. However, even if the people of the 3 ancient holy lands noticed something strange, they would not directly say it. No one was that stupid. After all, the person involved had nothing to do with them. Soon, the Vermilion Bird Holy Sun and the Ancient Phoenix Divine Maiden walked onto the Vermilion Bird stage. Today, the Holy Sun of the Vermilion Bird Sacred Ground and the Goddess of the Ancient Phoenix Mountain will become Tao companions. The person who announced the announcement was a great sage from the Qinglong Sacred Ground. His voice was shockingly powerful and unique. It contained a certain charm when he spoke, causing people to focus on listening. Now, oh, please bow to the great Tao of heaven and earth. Finding a Tao companion was a very relative matter. It was relatively simple, but it was also relatively difficult. Simple or difficult, that was relative to different people. Some cultivators just needed to find Tao companions and get along well with each other. There was no need to hold any kind of ceremony. They just needed to acknowledge the Tao of heaven and earth, or hold a simple ceremony and invite some friends to bear witness. Just like ordinary people getting married, ordinary families often wouldn't be too extravagant and would just hold a relatively simple wedding. However, some wealthy families were different and would hold a very grand wedding. That was the logic. The Vermilion Bird Holy Sun and the Ancient Phoenix Mountain were not some small force, but rather holy lands. They were both major holy lands, and the ones who had become Tao companions were the Vermilion Bird Holy Sun and the Ancient Phoenix Divine Maiden. Their statuses were even more extraordinary. With such statuses, the ceremony of becoming Tao companions naturally had to be very grand. It was widely announced and various elites from various holy lands would be invited to participate. However, no matter how small or grand the ceremony was, there was a step that had to be followed, and that was to bow to the great Tao of heaven and earth. From the moment cultivators stepped on the path of cultivation, they would have to comprehend the great Tao of heaven and earth. When they reached the saint level, they would have to walk out their own great Tao based on the foundation of the great Tao of heaven and earth. However, their own great Tao was also inseparable from the great Tao of heaven and earth. To a certain extent, the great Tao of heaven and earth would complement each other. However, no matter what, cultivators all started from comprehending the great Tao, and they had to maintain a natural reverence for the great Tao. When ordinary people got married, they would bow to the great Tao of heaven and earth, and then bow to their parent. Then, when cultivators became Tao companions, they would bow to the great Tao of heaven and earth. At the same time, they would also have the great Tao of heaven and earth as witnesses. To a certain extent, it was like swearing an oath to the great Tao of heaven and earth. If they violated it, they would suffer a backlash. Only in this way could they ensure that they wouldn't easily betray the other party. The great Tao of heaven and earth required 9 bows. 9 was the extreme number. If one didn't reach it, they wouldn't reach it. If one surpassed it, they wouldn't fall short. The 9 bows were not the end. After the 9 bows, they still had to chant the Tao runes to trigger the resonance of the great Tao of heaven and earth. Only then would they truly become Tao companions. That being said, ordinary cultivators would not go through so much trouble. At most, they would just bow to the great Tao of heaven and earth. If they only bowed to the great Tao of heaven and earth without chanting the Tao runes to trigger the resonance of the great Tao of heaven and earth, they would not suffer any harm even if they were to betray the other party. However, if they were to trigger the resonance of the great Tao of heaven and earth after chanting the Tao runes, it was equivalent to receiving the approval and blessings of the great Tao of heaven and earth. If they were to betray the other party, they would not die, but they would have to bear the consequences. First bow. The vermilion bird saint immediately bowed and bowed, while the ancient phoenix divine maiden bowed with the help of the 2 maidservants. Second bow. Third bow. The vermilion bird saint's face was filled with indescribable joy and excitement, while the ancient phoenix divine maiden's face did not show any hint of joy or sorrow. Either way, it was extremely calm, to the point that it felt a little dull. One bow after another. Soon, the 9 bows were completed. The Qinglong Sacred Area's great sage realm expert began to chant the Tao runes. His voice contained some sort of Tao rhyme, as if each of his words contained a mysterious and obscure force. His voice echoed in all directions, echoing endlessly between the heavens and earth. A gust of wind blew, causing ripples to appear. In the sky, wisps of fiery red began to spread. The red was not the red of blood, but the red of flames. It spread into the surroundings with a fiery aura, turning into red clouds that gathered in the sky. An endless mystical aura of the great Tao of flames began to spread. As the Qinglong Sacred Area's great sage realm expert continued to chant the Tao runes, the great Tao of heaven and earth began to ripple. A mystical force continued to accumulate. Thousands of birds continued to chirp, as countless Tao runes echoed in all directions. Flowers of the great Tao began to appear in the sky and slowly descended. This was the response of the great Tao of heaven and earth, as it began to resonate. Vermilion Bird Saint, Yan Zhenji, Ancient Phoenix Divine Maiden, Gu Qinghuang, are you willing to become Tao companions under the witness of the great Tao of heaven and earth? Are you willing to stay by each other's side in life and death, and explore the great Tao together? The Qinglong Sacred Area's great sage realm expert said in a dignified manner, accompanied by a series of explosions. I, Yan Zhenji, am willing. The vermilion bird Holy Sun took a deep breath and replied with a loud and powerful voice. It echoed in all directions, resonating with the explosions of the heavens and earth. Everyone's gaze instantly landed on the ancient phoenix divine maiden's face, waiting for her response. However, the ancient phoenix divine maiden did not respond for a long time. She seemed to be completely expressionless. Her mouth opened and closed, but her eyes were fluctuating, as if she was struggling. The ancient phoenix divine maiden's mouth slowly opened. It was a little stiff and difficult, as if she was resisting, but she was unable to resist. The vermilion bird Holy Sun looked at the ancient phoenix divine maiden, and a hint of anxiety flashed across his eyes. The ancient phoenix divine maiden's reaction immediately caused the vermilion bird holy leader and the others to frown slightly. Their expressions were unpleasant, and the people from the ancient Phoenix Mountain were the same. While they were secretly anxious, they were also a little annoyed, especially the Golden Phoenix Grand Sage, whose expression turned colder. Why is she still not responding? I am willing. The ancient Phoenix Divine Maiden opened her mouth with difficulty. As she was about to say the last word, a hint of joy appeared on the vermilion bird Holy Sun's face. But the last word was extremely difficult. The ancient Phoenix Divine Maiden's body trembled slightly, as if she was struggling. At this moment, even the slowest person realized that something was wrong. It seemed that something was wrong. The playful expression on the Holy Sun by Fu's face became more and more obvious, but he had no intention of interfering. And even if he did, not only would it not work, he would also not gain any benefit. The Jambu Palace ancient Holy Land was indeed very famous, but the Vermilion Bird Holy Land and the ancient Phoenix Mountain were not to be trifled with, either. Once any conflict broke out, there would be losses. Just because of this, any conflict would occur. Neither side was willing. The others also saw that something was wrong, but no one stepped forward. Suddenly, the ancient Phoenix Divine Maiden's body trembled slightly, as if she had been struck by lightning. Then, she stopped in an instant and opened her mouth again. I, the ancient Phoenix Divine Maiden, am willing. When these words rang out, the moment the last word was about to leave her mouth, suddenly, an earth-shattering sword chime rang out between heaven and earth. It was so resounding, so shocking, and so deafening. There was no lack of sword cultivators among those who had come. Their swords also seemed to be guided by a mysterious force, vibrating in their scabbards as if they were about to leave the scabbard, causing them to be extremely shocked. Accompanying that earth-shattering sword chime was a thunderous roar that seemed to split the heavens, directly reverberating through heaven and earth and shaking all directions. I don't agree. There were only 4 short words, but every single one of them contained a shocking amount of power. It was extremely decisive, and it drowned out the rumbling of the great Tao in the world. When it entered everyone's ears, it immediately caused a great commotion. Everyone's expression changed drastically. In such an occasion, there was actually someone who dared to say something like, "I don't agree." That was completely trampling on the faces of the Vermilion Bird Holy Land and the ancient Phoenix Mountain. Who was it? Who had the guts to do this? Who was so audacious? A sword light streaked across the sky, bringing with it a shocking sword power. It instantly flew over from outside the Vermilion Bird Holy Land and directly flew toward the Phoenix Arena. "How dare you!" A pristine saint from the Vermilion Bird Holy Land shouted angrily and immediately exploded, blasting out an extremely terrifying flame-flowing light. The flame burned, and the flowing light was extremely fast. When it merged together, it directly bombarded the sword light with a terrifying power. The attack was launched with anger, and there was no mercy in it. However, the blazing flame-flowing light was directly split by the sword light. It was like a hot knife through butter, and it did not have any effect at all. This scene immediately caused many people to feel astonished. Soon after, a playful smile appeared on the faces of some people. It seemed that this couple's ceremony was not so ordinary, and it was going to become interesting. Chapter 3067. The sword light soared across the sky and flew toward the Sparrow Phoenix stage after shattering the fiery light. "How dare you!" The great Saint Realm expert from the Qinglong sacred ground was enraged. He was invited by the Vermilion Bird sacred leader to support the pairing ceremony between the Vermilion Bird Holy Sun and the ancient Phoenix Divine Maiden. It was already the final stage of the ceremony, but someone dared to oppose it. This was not only a slap to the Vermilion Bird sacred ground and the ancient Phoenix Mountain, but it was also a slap to his face. As a great Saint Realm expert from a sacred ground, his status was extraordinary. However, he was still slapped in the face. Naturally, he was furious. As soon as he finished speaking, a terrifying aura burst out from the body of the Fire Dragon Grand Sage of the Qinglong sacred area. A fiery red aura spread into the surroundings, followed by a series of resounding dragon roars. Behind the Fire Dragon Grand Sage, the illusionary figure of a crimson-red dragon appeared and rapidly solidified. The dragon raised its head and glanced downward, while its pair of faint golden eyes stared straight at Chen Zong. A terrifying aura spread out and suppressed the surroundings. Chen Zong was the first to bear the brunt of it. "It's you again." The Vermilion Bird Holy Sun was stunned when he saw Chen Zong. Then, He flew into a rage and attacked without hesitation. A crimson long saber appeared in his hand. The saber's body was covered with fine lines like feathers. The vermilion bird divine saber. In his rage, the vermilion bird holy sun even activated the vermilion bird bloodline in his body. He unleashed all his strength and slashed with the saber. The shocking saber was accompanied by the cries of the vermilion bird. It was extremely loud and sharp. A terrifying crimson saber light shot out like a giant vermilion bird spreading its wings. The aura of this saber was even stronger than before. However, Chernzong was no longer the Chernzong who was forced to retreat by the vermilion bird holy sun. The current Chernzong had broken through from the inner world to the inner universe. His strength had increased significantly. They were two completely different worlds. Although the vermilion bird holy sun's saber attack was extremely powerful and could be considered one of the top pristine Saint Realm experts, it was still nothing to Chernzong. However, Chernzong did not plan to let the vermilion bird holy sun go. Putting aside the fact that the vermilion bird holy sun had injured him, the fact that he coveted Yu Nianxin was unforgivable. Chernzong unsheathed his sword and slashed out. Even the fire dragon supreme sage's saintly might could not stop Chernzong. The gigantic vermilion bird rushed out of the sea of fire and instantly charged towards Chernzong. Its beak was extremely sharp, as if it could pierce through everything. Its wings were like sharp blades that sliced through the air, cutting through everything. The sword light flashed and tore the void apart. The vermilion bird was instantly pierced through without any resistance. After the sword light pierced through the vermilion bird, it slashed toward the vermilion bird saint. The vermilion bird saint's sun's expression changed drastically. How could this be? It had only been a short period of time, so how did his opponent become so strong? Not only could he break the vermilion bird divine saber that he had unleashed with all his strength after activating his bloodline, but he could even kill him and bring about a fatal crisis. Stop! The fire dragon grand sage was furious. Originally, he felt offended and wanted to teach Chernzong a lesson. However, as soon as he released his divine might, the rosefinch saint attacked first. Thus, he stopped his plan and only used his divine might to suppress Chernzong. To some extent, he was cooperating with the rosefinch saint. Who would have thought that this young man could still draw his sword and fight against the vermilion bird holy sun under the pressure of his saint aura? The vermilion bird holy sun's attack was extremely powerful. The fire dragon grand sage could see that, but he did not expect it to be broken by his opponent's sword. Unbelievable! Although it was unbelievable, the fire dragon grand sage still reacted in time. He was very close and his reaction was very fast. He immediately grabbed the vermilion bird holy sun's sword radiance with his red dragon behind him. Under the dragon's claw, the space seemed to be solidified. Even the sword radiance was affected. Before it could hit the vermilion bird holy sun, it was caught by the dragon's claw and shattered. The vermilion bird holy sun secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Then, his expression became very ugly. He was not this person's opponent. If the fire dragon grand sage had not reacted in time, he would not have been able to dodge or even block the attack. He would have been injured directly. Damn it! Damn it! How could this be? After shattering the sword radiance with one claw and resolving the crisis of the vermilion bird holy sun, the fire dragon grand sage attacked again. The second dragon claw came across the sky and locked down a part of the space. It suppressed Chernzong completely and there was no way for him to dodge. Chernzong could feel that the space around him had become incomparably solid. It was constantly pressuring him, as if it was going to crush his body. If it was before his breakthrough, this kind of pressure would have brought him a great deal of restraint. It would not have been so easy to break through. But now, this kind of pressure seemed very normal. He could easily break through it. However, since the fire dragon grand sage attacked him, there was no need for him to hold back. Sword slash. The sword radiance flashed again and directly cut through the void. At the same time, it also broke the suppression of the dragon claw. In an instant, it attacked the dragon claw of the fire dragon Grand Sage. As soon as it came into contact with the dragon claw was immediately cut open. The sword radiance went straight for the fire dragon Grand Sage. How is this possible? Great Saint Realm! A great sword saint! Suddenly, there was a continuous stream of exclamations. Everyone was shocked. Originally, looking at Chen Zong's youthful face, it was enough to tell that he was not very old. They estimated that he was only a few hundred years old. They guessed that he was in the small saint realm. But seeing him defeat the vermilion bird Holy Sun with one sword was already very shocking. They did not expect him to be able to break the attack of the fire dragon Grand Sage. Was this not the power of a great saint realm cultivator? If he was not in the great saint realm, how could he fight against a great saint realm cultivator? Originally, the Golden Phoenix Grand Sage was full of anger. But he held back and did not attack because this was the Vermilion Bird Holy Ground. The people of the Vermilion Bird Holy Ground were enough to deal with the troublemakers. He did not expect this person's power to be so unexpected, so strong. The Golden Phoenix Grand Sage could not help but think of a few years ago, when the True Void Grand Sage brought Yi Futian to the ancient Phoenix Mountain to look for the goddess. However, he was stopped by the Golden Phoenix Grand Sage. At that time Yi Futian's strength was not bad, but only not bad. He was barely at the level of a small saint. Now, he could contend with a great saint. After slashing the dragon claw, Chen Zong immediately attacked the Fire Dragon Grand Sage with his second sword without hesitation. You are too arrogant. The Fire Dragon Grand Sage was clearly not a good-tempered person. His first attack was broken, and now there was a second attack. He was completely enraged. In his rage, the aura of the Fire Dragon Grand Sage multiplied. The 100-meter-long crimson dragon behind him roared angrily and spat out a huge fireball at Chen Zong. The huge fireball burned endlessly. The aura it emitted was extremely hot and terrifying. It was as if it could destroy everything. It directly blasted towards Chen Zong. This attack was not like the dragon claw from before. Like the dragon claw, it did not hold back at all. The huge fireball blasted towards him and dyed the surroundings red. The scorching heat swept over and burned everything. Chen Zong felt as if he had fallen into an oven and was burned endlessly. The sword radiance was also crushed. Slash. Without hesitation, Chen Zong immediately slashed out with his sword. The sword radiance pierced through the air. It was the sword 2 of the single-hearted sword technique. The moves of the single-hearted sword technique could be used as one wished. It could be said that the moves of the single-hearted sword technique were the moves of the basic sword technique. The difference was in its core. The superb core gave the single-hearted sword technique extraordinary profundity and power. As the sword slashed out, the sword radiance shocked the world. It collided with the fireball and instantly, the fireball was split apart like a hot knife through butter. Then, the second sword slashed out, causing the Flame Dragon Grand Sage's expression to change. He felt a strong threat. How could it be? Such a young junior actually made him feel threatened. How powerful was he? However, the Fire Dragon Grand Sage was a supreme saint after all. His methods were not ordinary. He immediately attacked. His dragon claw covered the sky and grabbed at the sword radiance. The dragon claw burned with shocking flames, as if it could burn everything into ashes and into nothingness. Chen Zong narrowed his eyes. A cold light flashed in his eyes. Then, he slashed out with his sword again. Seventh sword. After a month of closed-door cultivation, Chen Zong not only improved the single-hearted sword technique, he also improved it. He no longer needed to start from sword 1 and advance step by step. Instead, he could directly skip sword 1 and use other sword technique. Furthermore, the sword techniques he used all had the power they should have. They were exactly the same as when he started from sword 1. The moment the seventh swordsman struck, the sword radiance shocked the heavens. The flame dragon Grand Sage's expression changed drastically, and he retreated without hesitation. At this moment, he could no longer care about being forced to retreat by a junior. This sword made him feel extremely threatened, but the others did not. This was because the power of this sword was very restrained. There was no leakage. As a result, the others could not feel its shocking power. However, when they saw the Fire Dragon Grand Sage retreating quickly, they knew that this sword was definitely not ordinary. Even the Fire Dragon Grand Sage was forced to retreat. This person's power was extremely strong. In the Supreme Saint level, he was probably very strong. I don't care who you are. How dare you disturb the good things between the Vermilion Bird Holy Land and Ancient Phoenix Mountain? I will not forgive you, the Vermilion Bird Holy Leader said angrily. A high-pitched cry suddenly sounded. Then, a huge bird soared into the sky. Its entire body was burning with raging flames. It was the Vermilion Bird Holy Land's Great Elder. The Great Elder was a Supreme Saint. He was even more powerful than the Fire Dragon Grand Sage. Once he attacked, his power was extremely shocking. After the flaming bird soared to 1,000 meters in the sky, it suddenly turned around and dove down towards Chen Zong. Flames fell like a waterfall, burning and destroying everything. A shocking domain also fell on Chen Zong. It completely covered Chen Zong. Endless flames burned in the domain. Great Way Domain. The Vermilion Bird Holy Land's Great Elder activated his Great Way Domain to envelop Chen Zong. Chen Zong immediately felt a shocking pressure pressing down on him. It was extremely hot. It was as if his entire body had fallen into the interior of a volcano. He was being burned and roasted crazily. It was as if he was going to be burned to ashes. The power of such a Great Way Domain was difficult to resist. Chen Zong did not hesitate to release his inner universe. When the inner universe was released, a strong power immediately erupted. Chapter 3068. The sword radiance cut through heaven and earth, and nothing could resist it. Whether it was the giant fire dragon or the giant firebird, they were all destroyed by the sword radiance. The release of the inner universe was like an inner world, but its power was even stronger. It directly resisted the Great Way domains of the Fire Dragon Supreme Sage and the Vermilion Bird Holy Land Great Elder. Of course, this was also because the Great Way domains of the Fire Dragon Supreme Sage and the Vermilion Bird Holy Land Great Elder could not truly merge. They were all very surprised. What kind of Great Way domain was that? There were galaxies, nebula vortexes, a stream of light, tens of thousands of stars, and an independent blue star that spun endlessly. It gave off a very unique and beautiful feeling. At first glance, it was like a simple small universe. The Great Way domains of different great saints were often different, but more often than not, it was reflected in its power. As for its appearance, there was usually not much difference. Of course, there were still some more unique Great Way domains that were relatively rare. Chen Zong's release of the inner universe seemed like a very unique Great Way domain to everyone, but in reality, it was not a Great Way domain. Chen Zong's cultivation path was different from theirs. It was a path of its own, unique and unique. However, the power released from the inner universe was not inferior to the Great Way domain at all. It was even stronger. Taihao was the true sun, and the planets that surrounded Taihao had increased from the original 8 to 10. This meant that Chen Zong had already improved the single-hearted sword technique from the 8 swords to the 10 sword. Although it was only an improvement of 2 swords, the power of the 9th sword was 30% greater than that of the 8th sword, and the power of the 10th sword was 30% greater than that of the 9th sword. The improvement was very significant, and its power had become even more terrifying. Seeing that the Great Elder and the Fire Dragon Supreme Sage were unable to take down Chen Zong, the Vermilion Bird Holy Leader's expression was extremely ugly. As for the Vermilion Bird Holy Sun, he had already retreated to one side. His face seemed to be stained with blood, and his eyes flashed with cold light. He was extremely furious, but there was also a deep sense of powerlessness. How could this be? He had clearly beaten someone to the point that he had no choice but to flee not long ago. How could he be so powerful now? Indescribable jealousy filled the vermilion bird Holy Sun's heart. As for the ancient phoenix divine maiden, she was standing on the vermilion bird stage in a daze, as if she didn't feel anything at all. However, her two maids' expressions changed drastically. Their faces were filled with panic. However, the battle did not affect them. They had all intentionally avoided it. Who exactly are you? The Vermilion Bird Holy Leader. He Holy Leaders of the Vermilion Bird Holy Leader, and Vermilion Bird Supreme Sage. Although he was stronger than the Grand Elder, it would be difficult for him to defeat the Grand Elder without using the Vermilion Bird Holy Land's inheritance treasure. If the two great saints joined forces, he would be defeated even without the power of the treasure. Vermilionses Vermilion Bird Vermildly. And the Vermilionses. I'm Chernzong. Chernzong replied calmly as he stood in front of the ancient phoenix divine maiden. However, his eyes were extremely cold and sharp, as if they could cut through everything. Peerless Sword Saint. Not many people knew the name Chernzong. After all, there were many people with the same name. However, when it came to the title of Peerless Sword Saint, many people knew about it. At least, the Peerless Sword Saint was the first to discover the invasion of the Fiend God realm 100 years ago. In addition, the Starry Sword Palace had also announced that the Peerless Sword Saint was their honorary elder. But wasn't the Peerless Sword Saint a pristine saint? When did he break through to the Great Saint stage? There was no news or sign at all. For a moment, the saint-level powerhouse's minds were spinning. The 4 sword saints from the 10,000 Swords Mountain, the Starry Sword Palace, the No-Return Sword Valley, and the Ultimate Sword Villa all stared at Chernzong, especially the 3 sword saints from the 10,000 Swords Mountain and the Flying Star Sword Saint from the Starry Sword Palace. When the 3 sword saint gave the Eternal Sword Scroll to Chernzong, he was very rude. He thought that Chernzong was only a quasi-saint. He didn't expect Chernzong to be a sword saint, and now a great sword saint. It was unimaginable. He couldn't help but feel a little nervous. The Flying Star Sword Saint belonged to the Starry Sword Palace, and Chernzong was their honorary elder. To a certain extent, they were from the same sect. Unparalleled Sword Saint, today is the day that the Holy Son of the Vermilion Bird Holy Land and the Goddess of the Ancient Phoenix Mountain are going to marry each other. Please step back first and settle your grudges after this, the Holy Leader of the Vermilion Bird Holy Land quickly said. Chernzong couldn't help but smile. The Vermilion Bird Holy Leader's words sounded very normal. After all, today was a joyous occasion. Wasn't it normal to settle any grudges later after the joyous occasion was over? If Chernzong agreed, he would fall into his opponent's trap. After all, Chernzong came to stop this Tao companionship ceremony. If he let the Holy Son of the Vermilion Bird finish it first, he would be in big trouble. The ancient Phoenix Divine Maiden is my Tao companion, Chernzong said unhurriedly. However, the content of his words instantly caused everyone to feel astonished. How dare you? Qing Huang is the goddess of the ancient Phoenix Mountain. She is not your Tao companion. The Golden Phoenix Grand Sage roared. The other saint-level powerhouses all looked thoughtful. The Holy Sun by Fu's face showed a playful smile, as if he had found something fun. Chernzong ignored the Golden Phoenix Grand Sage's roar, as if he didn't hear it. The Vermilion Bird Holy Leader couldn't help but frown. He didn't know some things, so when he heard Chernzong's words, he was first angry, but then he thought of something. If he was lying, was there a need? Was there a need for a great saint to lie like this? The ancient Phoenix Divine Maiden was not bad, but the ancient mystic world was so big, and there were more than one holy ground. There were still female cultivators more outstanding than the ancient Phoenix Divine Maiden. The other party was a great saint, and whether it was status, position, or strength, they were all very high. Was there a need to lie? It seems that I can only suppress you. The vermilion bird holy leader suddenly exhaled deeply and made a decision. No matter what, today was the Tao companionship ceremony of the vermilion bird holy sun and the ancient phoenix divine maiden. He couldn't let it be ruined, no matter what. Then, he could only suppress the peerless sword saint. Everyone, please leave the vermilion bird holy ground first. Next, there would be a fierce battle. The others might be affected, so it was normal for them to leave first. Although some people wanted to stay and watch the show, since the vermilion bird holy leader said so, it was naturally better for them to leave. Not long after, all the unrelated people in the vermilion bird holy ground left, and the ancient phoenix divine maiden was also taken away. Chunzong didn't stop them, because in the following battle, he would use his full strength. At that time, he couldn't hold back, or else it would lead to terrible consequences. As long as he defeated the people of the vermilion bird holy ground, he could take the ancient phoenix divine maiden away, and no one would be able to stop him. After the others left the vermilion bird holy ground, only Chunzong and the vermilion bird holy ground remained. Even the small saints retreated to the side, and only the great saints remained. Peerless Sword Saint, leave now, and this matter will end here, the vermilion bird holy leader said again, his tone more serious. I can leave. Chunzong seemed to be easy to talk to, and he immediately replied. However, his next sentence made the people of the vermilion bird holy ground and ancient phoenix mountain pale. But the ancient phoenix divine maiden wants to leave with me. That's impossible, the golden phoenix grand sage said angrily. It seems like you really want to become the enemy of the vermilion bird holy ground. The vermilion bird holy leader's eyes darkened, and the aura around him continued to spread. The temperature in the air rose at a shocking speed, as if everything was being burned. Even the void became distorted. The vermilion bird holy leader suddenly shouted in a low voice. He opened his arms and a huge vermilion bird shadow appeared behind him. The vermilion bird holy leader spread its wings as if it was about to soar into the sky, and it was accompanied by an extremely loud cry. A terrifying aura instantly erupted. Chunzong's eyes narrowed. The aura of the vermilion bird holy leader was indeed very strong. As expected of the holy leader of a holy ground, he was probably one of the stronger great saints. Tian Yen. The vermilion bird holy leader shouted again. The holy leaders of the vermilion bird holy ground all changed their expressions. It was as if those two words contained some kind of magical power. Chunzong could feel it. After the vermilion bird holy leader shouted those two words, a terrifying aura erupted from the depths of the vermilion bird holy ground. It was like a volcano erupting. The shocking aura shot into the sky, and it was extremely powerful. It was accompanied by bursts of red and golden light, as if it was going to burn the sky. The strength of that aura made Chunzong think of the ocean-suppressing pearl. Could it be a treasure? Chunzong couldn't help but squint. If the vermilion bird holy leader also had a treasure, it wouldn't be so easy to deal with him this time. This was because Chunzong, who had the ocean-suppressing pearl, knew very well how powerful a treasure was. Then, a ray of golden red light shot into the sky from the depths of the vermilion bird holy ground. It turned into a golden red bird and flew over at an extremely fast speed. The aura it emitted shook the heavens and the earth. Everyone's gaze fell on the golden red firebird. There was an indescribable sense of respect and envy in their eyes. The golden red firebird flew through the sky and landed in the vermilion bird holy leader's hand. Vermilion bird heavenly flames. It was the vermilion bird holy ground's inherited treasure. It could be considered as a treasure that was between a top-tier holy weapon and a true treasure. It was even more powerful than a top-tier holy weapon. The vermilion bird holy leader activated the vermilion bird heavenly flames. In an instant, a terrifying aura exploded. A ray of golden red light pierced through the sky and shot towards Chen Zong. Fast. It was so fast that it directly burned through the void. The extremely hot aura immediately made Chen Zong feel threatened. It was as if he was going to be burned to ashes. Chen Zong immediately swung his sword. Sword 5. A ray of sword light tore through the sky and instantly shot towards the golden red fire beam. In an instant, the sword light was shattered. However, the golden red light beam didn't seem to be affected at all. It shot towards Chen Zong again. Through the sword light, Chen Zong could feel the terrifying power contained in the golden red light beam. It was a terrifying power that could burn everything to ashes. It was extremely shocking. However, it wasn't enough for him to use the ocean-suppressing pearl. Chapter 3069. Streaks of golden red light pierced through the void with unparalleled heat. Wherever they passed, the void was distorted by the terrifying heat, as if it had completely melted. Chen Zong could even clearly see the dust particles floating in the void. These primitive dust particles were all incinerated into nothingness by the terrifying golden red light. Chen Zong shifted his body and waved his sword continuously. As he dodged the golden red light, he used his sword radiance to block it. Then, with a burst of speed, Chen Zong stepped into the air and ripples appeared under his feet. One could vaguely see strands of silk intersecting with each other. In the next moment, Chen Zong's body disappeared. The vermilion bird holy leader's expression changed drastically. He immediately unleashed a terrifying aura and turned into a stream of flame and flew to one side. At the same time, a streak of sword radiance pierced through the air. Chen Zong's body appeared along with the sword radiance. After the vermilion bird holy leader dodged this attack, Chen Zong's expression did not change. He immediately attacked again. Streaks of sword radiance followed one after another. They seemed to have condensed into a straight line and completely locked onto the vermilion bird holy leader. The vermilion bird holy leader dodged again and again. His movement technique was extremely profound. However, under the lock of Chen Zong's sword radiance, he felt that it was difficult to dodge. In an instant, the vermilion bird heavenly flame in his hand seemed to have melted into water and merged into the vermilion bird holy leader's body. A layer of golden red flames burned all over his body. It was difficult to feel the temperature, but the surrounding space was completely distorted. The light refracted, causing the vermilion bird holy leader's body to look like a dream. For a moment, Chen Zong actually made the wrong decision. Then, the golden red flames gathered in the vermilion bird holy leader's right hand and formed a long sword. A golden red long sword. This was a powerful secret technique of the vermilion bird holy leader, the vermilion bird divine sword. The vermilion bird divine sword of the vermilion bird holy leader was even more powerful than the vermilion bird holy son's vermilion bird divine sword. At the very least, its aura was many times stronger. With the blade in his hand, the holy leader of the vermilion bird sect's aura became more and more condensed. He slashed out and the blade light tore through the air. It carried with it a terrifying power and murderous intent as it slashed towards Chen Zong mercilessly. The vermilion bird holy leader's heart was filled with fury. He was furious that Chen Zong's arrival had disrupted the betrothal ceremony between the vermilion bird holy son and the ancient phoenix divine maiden. Moreover, he had directly slapped the vermilion bird holy ground's face. Regardless of the result today, the vermilion bird holy ground had already become a laughingstock. If news of this spread, their reputation would be greatly reduced. Thinking of this, the vermilion bird holy leader became even more furious. His killing intense sword, and every slash seemed to be fueled by his anger, becoming even more powerful. The vermilion bird divine lord had lived for a very long time, at least tens of thousands of years. He had also immersed himself in the vermilion bird divine saber for a very long time. He specialized in saber arts and was extremely exquisite. For a moment, he was evenly matched with Chen Zong. But gradually, Chernzong analyzed the mystery of his saber technique and targeted it. He began to be at a disadvantage. How is this possible? The Vermilion Bird Holy Ground and Ancient Phoenix Mountains sage-level cultivators widened their eyes. Their faces were filled with disbelief and shock. The Vermilion Bird Holy Leader had already used the Vermilion Bird Heavenly Flames, the inherited treasure of the Vermilion Bird Holy Ground, and displayed an extremely powerful saber technique. However, he still couldn't do anything to his opponent. In fact, he was slowly losing the upper hand. This was extremely shocking. Chernzong was also very shocked by the Vermilion Bird Holy Leader's strength. If it was a month ago, he wouldn't be a match for him. However, after a month of seclusion, his strength had at least doubled. His sword techniques had become even more powerful. Even if he didn't use the sea-suppressing pearl, the Vermilion Bird Holy Leader wouldn't be a match for him. "Take him down!" the Vermilion Bird Holy Leader shouted. At this time, he couldn't care less about his reputation. The most important thing right now was to suppress Chernzong. Hearing the Vermilion Bird Holy Leader's words, the great sage-level cultivators of the Vermilion Bird Holy Ground instantly erupted. The Great Elder and Second Elder immediately released their Great Way domains to suppress Chernzong. They all cultivated the inheritance of the Vermilion Bird Holy Ground. Hence, their Great Way domains were similar. Hence, to a certain extent, they could stack their Great Way domains together to increase their strength. When combined with the Great Way domain of the Vermilion Bird Holy Leader, their strength increased again. Under the overpowering Great Way domains, they formed a fiery red patch that pressed down on Chernzong. Immediately, Chernzong felt an immense pressure pressing down on him. He could only barely resist the pressure by releasing his inner universe. Chernzong's release of his inner universe was combined with the mysteries of the prodigious stellar 10,000 layers sword technique. Hence, it was much stronger than a simple Great Way domain. Even so, he could only barely resist the Great Way domains released by 3 great sage-level cultivators. The Golden Phoenix Grand Sage wanted to attack but didn't have the chance. He could only stare fiercely at Chernzong. Under the attack of 3 great sage-level cultivators' Great Way domains, Chernzong was under immense pressure. He still had to face the combined attacks of 3 great sage-level cultivators. The Vermilion Bird Divine Blade. This was an extremely high-level inherited secret technique of the Vermilion Bird Holy Ground. All 3 great sage-level cultivators had mastered it. Their blade techniques were exquisite and unparalleled. They attacked Chernzong from 3 different directions, increasing the pressure on Chernzong. However, with the single-hearted sword technique, Chernzong was still able to resist the attacks of the 3 great sage-level cultivators. He looked for an opportunity to counterattack. Among them, the Vermilion Bird Holy Leader brought about the greatest pressure. On the other hand, the Second Elder of the Vermilion Bird Holy Ground brought about the least pressure. He seemed to have just broken through to the Great Sage level not too long ago. It was estimated to be only a few hundred years ago. A few hundred years sounded very long. However, to a Great Sage level cultivator, it wasn't long at all. Sometimes, a closed-door training session could last for 100 years without much improvement. It could be said that the higher one's cultivation level, the more difficult it was to improve. The time required would also be longer. A cold glint flashed in Chernzong's eyes as they spun like a nebula. In an instant, the nebula vortex in the innerverse also began to stir. It spun at an extreme speed, then shrank and expanded in an instant, erupting with an extremely overbearing power. Double Divine Firmament. The explosive secret technique that he had comprehended when he was in the inner universe tier was unleashed in an instant. His sword pierced through the air directly toward the Second Elder, who was the weakest among them. The Second Elder's expression changed drastically. He couldn't dodge this terrifying sword attack at all. It was too fast. He didn't even have time to raise his saber to block the attack. His body was directly pierced through. The sword qi wreaked havoc in his body, instantly injuring him. However, the second elder didn't die. A great sage-level cultivator was even harder to kill than a small saint-level cultivator. Even if Chernzong's strength surpassed the second elder's, it wouldn't be so easy to kill him. Moreover, Chernzong didn't plan to kill the second elder. After all, the purpose of this trip was to take away the ancient phoenix divine maiden, not to kill him. However, this sword attack still injured the second elder and forced him to retreat. For a moment, he could only retreat and expel the sword qi wreaking havoc in his body. He didn't have the strength to continue fighting. Chernzong unleashed another explosive attack. It was twice as powerful as the divine firmament. Even the great elder couldn't block this attack and was injured directly. Only the Vermilion Bird Holy Leader was left alive. The Vermilion Bird Holy Leader's expression was extremely serious. In just an instant it was so fast that even he couldn't react. First, it was the second elder, followed by the great elder, who was injured one after another. He couldn't continue fighting for a moment. Cold sweat unconsciously seeped out of the Vermilion Bird Holy Leader's forehead, but it was evaporated by the high temperature. Facing Chernzong, the Vermilion Bird Holy Leader felt an immense pressure. On the other hand, the Vermilion Bird Holy Sun was clenching his teeth so hard that they almost broke. Vermilion Bird Divine Saber. Burning Star. The Vermilion Bird Holy Leader completely unleashed his power. The ultimate move of the Vermilion Bird Divine Saber was also unleashed in an instant. As the saber slashed out, the blazing golden red light seemed to be able to burn the stars into ashes. This move was the most powerful move of the Vermilion Bird Divine Saber. A pristine saint couldn't unleash it. Only a great saint could unleash it. However, every time it was unleashed, it would exhaust the Vermilion Bird Divine Saber's power. Therefore, it couldn't be unleashed easily. Chernzong's expression changed drastically. The terrifying saber light slashed towards him as if it was going to destroy him. The void was also completely shattered by the saber. The palace below directly collapsed under the pressure of the saber. The shockingly high temperature burned the palace wantonly, turning it pitch black. 3 times Taihao. Chernzong slashed out with his sword. The power that erupted from it was even more powerful. The true sun instantly pressed down and collided with the star-burning saber. After a slight pause, the star-burning saber was shattered and it continued to charge towards the Vermilion Bird Holy Leader. Unable to block it, the Vermilion Bird Holy Leader was instantly hit and was sent flying. The Vermilion Bird Heavenly Flame on his body protected him, so he wasn't injured. However, he was still extremely shocked that he was sent flying. Vermilion Bird Holy Leader, I don't want to become enemies with the Vermilion Bird Holy Ground. I'm only here to take away my cultivation partner. Chernzong didn't chase after him. Instead, he said in a deep voice, "How can the ancient phoenix divine lady be your cultivation partner?" The Vermilion Bird Holy Leader said angrily. However, he didn't attack again because he knew that he wasn't the Peerless Sword Saint's opponent at all. The Peerless Sword Saint's strength was probably at the peak of the Great Saint realm. It wasn't wise to become enemies with such an expert. Although he was extremely angry, the Vermilion Bird Holy Leader still had to think about the Vermilion Bird Holy Ground. This was something that the Holy Leader had to do. He had to think about the development of the Holy Ground at all times. Otherwise, he wouldn't be qualified to be the Holy Leader. Even if the Vermilion Bird Holy Sun broke through to the Great Saint realm and inherited the position of the Holy Leader, there was still a trial period. If he did anything that was detrimental to the Vermilion Bird Holy Ground, he would be removed from his position. The ancient Phoenix Divine Lady's real name is Yunyanxin. She is my cultivation partner. I've already used the Taishian Heavenly Mirror to check this point a few times. Chernzong said calmly, but his tone was very certain. However, I don't know why she became the ancient Phoenix Mountain's Divine Lady and lost her memories. Then, Chernzong looked at the Golden Phoenix Grand Sage. His gaze was extremely sharp, as if it could pierce through the Golden Phoenix Grand Sage. "Perhaps you know something?" Instantly, everyone looked at the Golden Phoenix Grand Sage. Qing Huang is the ancient Phoenix Mountain's divine lady. She was, is, and will always be. The Golden Phoenix Grand Sage's expression flashed as he said sternly, "So you do know something." Chernzong's words caused the Golden Phoenix Grand Sage's expression to change slightly. However, it returned to normal in an instant. The Vermilion Bird Holy Leader and the others' expressions darkened. They were all people who had lived for many years and were very knowledgeable. They could tell that there was something wrong. In reality, the Vermilion Bird Holy Ground didn't know that the situation was so complicated. "Golden Phoenix Grand Sage, what is the truth?" The Vermilion Bird Holy Leader's expression was cold. "Please say it. If the ancient Phoenix Mountain really hid something and caused this situation, then it would be a huge mistake." Chapter 3070. Many pairs of eyes stared at the Golden Phoenix Grand Sage. Even though she was a great saint, she could not help but feel pressured by so many gazes. This was especially so for the three great saints of the Vermilion Bird Holy Ground. The pressure from their gazes was the most intense. If there was really something wrong, then the relationship between the Vermilion Bird Holy Ground and the ancient Phoenix Mountain would be affected. This time, the Vermilion Bird Holy Sun and the ancient Phoenix Holy Maiden were going to become Taoist companions. If the ancient Phoenix Holy Maiden was the Taoist companion of the Peerless Sword Saint, then it would be against the laws of heaven and earth. When the time came, they would have to pay a hefty price. It might even affect the Vermilion Bird Holy Sun. This was the main point. No matter what, they had to get to the bottom of this. Evidently, the Golden Phoenix Grand Sage had thought of this too. Her expression changed. She knew something but did not want to say it out loud. "Golden Phoenix Grand Sage." The Vermilion Bird Holy Leader spoke again. From the Golden Phoenix Grand Sage's expression, he could tell that there was something going on. His expression turned cold. "If you don't say it out loud, then don't blame me for being rude." The Vermilion Bird Holy Leader could not help but be angry. If the Holy Sun and the Holy Maiden of the two holy grounds became Taoist companions, then they would explore the laws of heaven and earth together. If word of this spread, it would increase the reputation of the two holy grounds. However, if the ancient Phoenix Divine Maiden really was the Tao partner of the Peerless Sword Saint, and for some unknown reason, she had become Tao partners with the Vermilion Bird Holy Sun, not only would that destroy the Vermilion Bird Holy Sun, but it would also destroy the reputation of the Vermilion Bird Holy Ground. The Holy Sun was the successor of the Holy Leader and the future leader of the Vermilion Bird Holy Ground. He was very important. He could definitely break through to the Great Saint level. Once he did, the Vermilion Bird Holy Ground would have one more Great Saint. Their top powers would be even stronger. This was a big deal for the Vermilion Bird Holy Ground. Furthermore, the reputation of the Vermilion Bird Holy Ground was also very important. All in all, if the ancient Phoenix Mountain knew that the ancient Phoenix Holy Maiden already had a Taoist companion but still insisted on her becoming Taoist companions with the Holy Sun, then it was certain that this was a premeditated action against the Vermilion Bird Holy Ground. This was a plot to destroy the Vermilion Bird Holy Ground. The Vermilion Bird Holy Leader could not understand. The ancient Phoenix Mountain and the Vermilion Bird Holy Ground had had good relations for many years. Was this the intention of the ancient Phoenix Mountain people? Or was this the ancient Phoenix ancestors' idea? If it was the latter, then it was even more terrifying. Could it be that the ancient Phoenix Old Ancestor wanted to deal with the Vermilion Bird Old Ancestor? At that moment, many thoughts flashed through the Holy Leader's mind. His expression became more and more dignified, and the chi around him became more and more terrifying. It was as if the Vermilion Bird heavenly flames had sensed his will. The The vermilion bird heavenly flames released even more terrifying energy, causing the holy leader's gaze to become even more oppressive. No one present was a fool. Very quickly they thought of something. The pressure on the Golden Phoenix Grand Sage increased, and his expression changed drastically. Furthermore, the Golden Phoenix Grand Sage also thought of some problems that she had never paid attention to before. What if the ancient Phoenix Divine Maiden really was the Tao companion of the peerless Sword Saint? Could it be that they were really targeting the Vermilion Bird Holy Land? The Golden Phoenix Grand Sage was certain that the ancient Phoenix Mountain had no intention of targeting the Vermilion Bird Holy Grounds. However, how could he explain this? Maybe I should wake up the ancestor. The holy leader spoke again. His tone was calm, but there was an indescribable pressure. Ancestor? It was the Vermilion Bird Ancestor. The Vermilion Bird Ancestor seemed to be in a deep sleep. To a holy beast, deep sleep was very normal. However, holy beasts rarely cultivated by themselves. Instead, they used a long period of time to increase their strength. Deep sleep was also a very common method for them to increase their strength. Originally, the holy leader had already planned to wake the Vermilion Bird Ancestor to deal with Chunzong. After all, he was no match for him. Hearing the holy leader's words, the Golden Phoenix Grand Sage's expression changed again. Qing Huang was brought back by the ancestor more than 100 years ago. The Golden Phoenix Grand Sage thought for a while and finally said, after the ancestor brought Qing Huang back, he directly appointed her as the ancient Phoenix Mountain Holy Lady. Where did he bring her back from? Chunzong's tone was a little anxious. I don't know. The Golden Phoenix Grand Sage replied coldly. She had a lot of opinions about Chunzong and even viewed him as an enemy. However, she did not lie because she did not know where the Grandmaster brought Gu Qinghuang back to the ancient Phoenix Mountain. Chunzong frowned slightly. It seemed like he still had to go to the ancient Phoenix Mountain to find the ancient Phoenix ancestor. Who did this to Nianxin? Chunzong asked again. At that time, Chunzong was planning to go to the ancient Phoenix Mountain. However, along the way, he heard that the Vermilion Bird Holy Sun was going to find a partner. This had nothing to do with him. However, when he heard that the Holy Sun wanted to find a partner with the ancient Phoenix Divine Lady, he immediately rushed over. Luckily, he was not too late. If he was a few breaths later, things would be very troublesome. Once he arrived, Chunzong felt that the ancient Phoenix Divine Lady's condition was not right. However, because he was busy fighting, he stopped fighting and asked her about it. The Golden Phoenix Grand Sage did not answer Chunzong's question. It was as if she did not hear him. In reality, many people knew that the ancient Phoenix Divine Lady's condition was not right. She was not very willing. However, the holy leader did not care and did not need to care. As long as the ceremony was completed, she would have no choice but to accept it. However, now that he thought about it, it seemed that things were not so simple. Golden Phoenix Grand Sage, could it be that the ancient Phoenix ancestor did this to the ancient Phoenix Divine Lady? The holy leader squinted his eyes. The Golden Phoenix Grand Sage was silent. Her silence was a tacit admission. Although she was unwilling, she could not deny it. Could it be that the ancient Phoenix ancestor? The holy leader's face darkened. He felt as if a storm was coming. Bring the ancient Phoenix Divine Lady here. Very quickly, the ancient Phoenix Divine Lady was brought over. Her face was expressionless. Chunzong's body flashed and he immediately approached the ancient Phoenix Divine Lady. Nianxin, I'm here. Chunzong called out. However, the ancient Phoenix Divine Lady did not react at all. Chunzong grabbed the ancient Phoenix Divine Lady's hand. He activated his mixed Yuan Heart Force and it immediately spread into the ancient Phoenix Divine Lady's arm and body. He wanted to find out what kind of method was controlling her. The mixed Yuan Heart Force was a very comprehensive and profound power. However, the Golden Phoenix Grand Sage attacked Chunzong directly. She wanted to interrupt Chenzong. However, the holy leader blocked this attack. At this moment, the holy leader also wanted to know what was going on. The mixed Yuan heart force continued to probe deeper and deeper. Finally, Chenzong found the source of the abnormality. In that instant, the abnormality seemed to have been triggered and it exploded. A terrifying aura erupted from the ancient phoenix divine maiden's body. Her crimson aura was like a raging inferno that soared into the sky. That kind of aura contained a supreme charm and was extremely tyrannical. The void was directly burned and collapsed. Chenzong unconsciously retreated with a shocked expression on his face. The other great saints also had a look of horror on their faces. This aura was no ordinary aura. It surpassed the great sage level. This was the aura of a divine ancestor. A crimson-red aura rose from the ancient phoenix divine lady's body and turned into a crimson-red shadow. It was the shadow of a phoenix. Grand Elder! The golden phoenix grand sage and the other sages of the ancient phoenix mountain exclaimed in shock. Ancient phoenix grand elder! The holy leader's expression changed. He did not dare to be careless. After all, this was a divine ancestor on the same level as the vermilion bird grand elder. She was extremely powerful. You're the one who triggered my mark. This crimson-red phoenix, which was only the size of a palm, turned her eyes. Her golden eyes were extremely cold as they landed on Chenzong. This made Chenzong feel pressured. It's me. Chenzong narrowed his eyes and stared at the crimson-red phoenix. He felt the terrifying pressure from it, but he was not afraid. One must know that Chenzong had successfully escaped from the pursuit of a divine ancestor and an emperor of the sea. He had developed a strong sense of confidence. Ancient Phoenix Grand Elder, why did you do something to Yun Yenxin? Junior, how dare you? The ancient Phoenix Grand Elder was extremely angry. Although he was only the size of a palm, he instantly released a terrifying aura. It was as if he was offended and angered. The terrifying aura was extremely shocking. It was as if he could destroy everything. He directly spat out a flame. This flame was not thick, but it was extremely condensed. It directly burned the void. Chenzong immediately felt a terrifying sense of danger. It was as if he would be burned to ashes if he touched it. It was much more terrifying than the vermilion bird heavenly flames used by the Holy Lord of the vermilion bird sect. Chenzong's figure flashed and directly dodged. The void was burned, but the ancient Phoenix Grand Elder did not stop. He suddenly spread his wings and immediately fanned out a large amount of blazing flames. It was like a torrent that directly blasted towards Chenzong. Covered the sky and covered the earth. It directly covered a range of 1,000 meters, but Chenzong still managed to dodge it. Once, twice, thrice, all of them were dodged by Chenzong. The ancient Phoenix Grand Elder was even more furious. Obviously, he was unable to communicate with the furious ancient Phoenix Grand Elder. The flames covered the sky and covered the earth, directly sweeping in all directions. Immediately, it turned into a torrent that blasted towards Chenzong. He couldn't dodge it. Chenzong couldn't dodge this attack. Since he couldn't dodge it, he could only face it head-on. Erupt. 3 times the divine firmament. An extremely dazzling sword light broke through the sky in an instant, directly tearing the void and shooting out. It faced the torrent of flames with irresistible force and killed its way through. Under the eruption of his full strength, the power of Chenzong's sword was terrifying to the extreme. Kill. Since the ancient Phoenix Grand Elder couldn't communicate normally, or was unwilling to communicate with him, then he would fight. Moreover, Chenzong could also see that this wasn't the ancient Phoenix Grand Elder's real body, but a power clone. He would first destroy the clone, then go to the ancient Phoenix Mountain to find the ancient Phoenix Grand Elder's real body and find out what was going on. Under the eruption of the sword, 3 times the power, it was even more terrifying and tyrannical. The supreme sword intent was earth-shattering, and nothing could resist it. Everything would be broken under this sword. Sword breaking all laws. The torrent of flames was suddenly broken. The sword flew across the sky towards the ancient Phoenix Grand Elder without mercy. The second eruption, 3 times the divine firmament, this sword was even more terrifying. Attacking without holding back, in addition to the fact that the ancient Phoenix Grand Elder was only a power clone and not his real body, he couldn't resist this sword and was immediately hit. Chapter 3071. The sword light was shocking as it pierced through the sky and hit the ancient Phoenix Patriarch's avatar. This strength doppelganger didn't look big. It was only the size of a palm. However, it contained an extremely terrifying power. An ordinary Great Sage Realm expert wasn't its opponent at all. Especially, the flame of ancient Phoenix Old Ancestor was extremely astonishing. Even so, such a flame could not do anything to Chunzong. Even if it did affect him, it would be absorbed by Chunzong's cosmic true body. It would then flow into the innerverse, where it would turn into a huge ball of fire that quickly exploded and swept out in all directions. However, this level of power still couldn't do anything to the innerverse and couldn't cause any real damage. 3 times the power of the divine firmament, a sword broke through the sky and directly hit the ancient Phoenix Patriarch's avatar. The sword intent was monstrous, and the sword chi exploded, instantly injuring the ancient Phoenix Patriarch's avatar, causing sparks to splatter. "Ant, you deserve to die!" The avatar of the ancient Phoenix Old Ancestor shrieked. He was enraged to the extreme as terrifying flames erupted from his body, bombarding Chunzong once again. 3 times the power of the divine firmament. Chunzong erupted again. When he was in his inner world, 3 times the power of the divine firmament could only be used once in a short period of time. After his inner world broke through to the innerverse, it was different. The mixed Yuan heart force was more vigorous and pure, and its power was more powerful. Its recovery speed seemed to be faster as well. Moreover, each eruption didn't need to be completely exhausted. In this way, Chunzong could continuously erupt and increase his battle strength. 3 times the power of the divine firmament, a sword broke through the sky and broke through the torrent of flames once again, attacking the ancient Phoenix Patriarch's avatar. The others had already retreated far away. The Vermilion Bird Sacred Leader was even more shocked by Chunzong's strength. He was too strong, and he could actually put the ancient Phoenix Patriarch at a disadvantage. Of course, they all knew that this wasn't the real ancient Phoenix Patriarch, but only his avatar. It had terrifying strength, and ordinary great saints were no match for it. Another sword hit, and the ancient Phoenix Patriarch's avatar exploded, turning into countless flames that sputtered in all directions and dissipated. Everyone was stunned by this scene. Even if it was just a power clone, it was still a clone of the sacred ancestor level. It didn't just represent strength, it also represented a supreme status. In the ancient profound world, the sacred ancestor was supreme. This was a principle that had never changed since ancient times. It had always been like this since a long, long time ago. But now, the sacred ancestor's power clone had been defeated by a great saint in full view of the public. It was a subversive feeling. How audacious! Wasn't he afraid of the sacred ancestor's anger? Whether he was afraid or not, the truth was that this wasn't important. What was important was that the ancient Phoenix Old Ancestor's strength avatar had been defeated in front of everyone. The Golden Phoenix Grand Sage felt as if he was in a dream. Back then, this kid's strength was still very weak, like an ant in front of him. He didn't expect that in just over 100 years, his strength would rise to such a terrifying level, completely surpassing him. Powerless. The Golden Phoenix Grand Sage felt an indescribable sense of powerlessness in her heart, especially when she saw the ancient Phoenix Old Ancestor's strength avatar being defeated with a single sword strike. That sense of powerlessness became even more profound. As the ancient Phoenix Old Ancestor's strength avatar was defeated, The ancient phoenix divine maiden also regained her consciousness and was no longer under his control. "It's you." The ancient phoenix divine maiden saw Chunzong and was slightly shocked. Then, her expression changed as she vaguely felt that something was wrong, as if something had happened. "It's me. I'm here to pick you up." Chunzong stared at the ancient phoenix divine maiden's incomparably familiar face. His tone was indescribably gentle, and his eyes were also filled with warmth. "Let's go and find your lost memories." "Okay." The ancient phoenix divine maiden fixed her gaze on Chunzong. That gaze and that smile, for some reason, suddenly had a familiar feeling, as if it was a distant memory. But when she tried to think about it, she couldn't think of anything, and her mind was blank. In reality, when Chunzong found the ancient phoenix divine maiden and told her those things, the ancient phoenix divine maiden began to investigate after returning to the ancient phoenix mountain. In the end, she even asked the ancient phoenix old ancestor. Although she didn't find anything, she was already suspicious. And in the end, she lost her consciousness and was affected by the ancient phoenix old ancestor's strength avatar. Now that she thought about it, she still had some memories. All of this made her feel that something was wrong. Could it be that she was really this person's Tao companion? The Yunyenshin that he mentioned and not the ancient phoenix? Whether it was true or not, she still needed to verify it herself. A sudden change occurred. The wind that blew from heaven and earth suddenly changed. It was so sudden that it seemed to have changed from disorderly to orderly, as if it was controlled by some invisible force, blowing from all directions. This wind carried with it a trace of astonishing aura. Everyone present was a sage-level cultivator, and they had an extraordinary sense of the aura between heaven and earth. Their expressions changed drastically. What was going on? Could it be "I've finally found you"? As the strands of wind that carried a terrifying aura swept over from all directions, a voice that was filled with dignity instantly rang out. It resounded through the heavens and the earth, reverberating endlessly. The moment the voice fell, the blowing wind became more and more intense, and it became more and more astonishing. It emitted a whistling sound that reverberated between heaven and earth. It kept gathering, and a huge illusory figure also appeared, and then it kept solidifying. The Giant of Wind. 1,000-meter-tall giant of wind appeared in the void, exuding an extremely terrifying pressure that suppressed everything. That kind of aura instantly caused everyone's expression to change drastically. Divine Ancestor. This kind of aura was the aura of a divine ancestor. What was going on? Why would someone come here? And it seemed that they were hostile. They actually chased me all the way here. Chunzong frowned slightly, and his expression suddenly became very serious. They chased me all the way here from the sea. Then, what about the Sea Emperor? Did he also chase me all the way to the land region? Wait for me, Chunzong said to Yunyenshin. Immediately, he exploded with extreme speed, turned into an extremely sharp sword light, and instantly broke through the restraint of the wild wind, and immediately flew away. Chunzong did not intend to escape, but to fight with the divine ancestor. This battle was inevitable because the divine ancestor had chased him all the way here from the sea. Even if he escaped, he would definitely be caught, unless he hid in some secret place, but there was no guarantee that he would not be found. Or he could hide in a holy land with a divine ancestor, such as the Star's Sword Palace. However, a divine ancestor was not so easy to deal with, and Chunzong did not intend to bring trouble to others. Besides, now that he had found Yunyenshin, it would be very disadvantageous if he kept running away. Now, he was very strong, and he had defeated a great saint. What about the divine ancestor? Chunzong had to admit that when the divine ancestor Tianfeng arrived, he was not afraid, but a little excited and a little bit of fighting spirit. This fighting spirit was increasing at an astonishing speed, and became more and more intense. His extremely powerful qi and blood were also constantly trembling, as if they were about to burn. Don't even think about leaving. The wind giant moved. Although it was 1,000 meters in size, it wasn't slow at all. Instead, it was very fast. It was like a violent gust of wind blowing over. As the voice sounded, a terrifying roar of wind was heard, and the giant of wind's body flashed, chasing after the divine ancestor. At the same time, it stretched out its hand to grab in front of it. In an instant, all the wind between heaven and earth was under its command, whistling from all directions, attacking Chen Zong and binding Chen Zong, but it was broken by Chen Zong's supreme sword will. Chase. The divine ancestor Tianfeng turned into a giant of wind and chased after the giant of wind. The wind between heaven and earth was under its control, and space and time were also affected. Chen Zong felt that if he wanted to travel through time, it would be more than 10 times more difficult. It could even be said that it was difficult to do. Divine Ancestor. This was the amazing power of a divine ancestor. He had already comprehended the great path, that he had mastered to an extreme, a limit, as if he could control everything. The divine ancestor Tianfeng controlled the way of Tianfeng, and all the wind between heaven and earth was under his command. Making an enemy of him was like making an enemy of the wind between heaven and earth, and would be completely targeted. Therefore, this was the reason why a supreme saint was no match for a divine ancestor. No matter how strong a supreme saint was, in the end it was still their own strength. At most, they could release a great path domain, but the divine ancestor's great path domain had changed qualitatively and was completely dispersed. Only a divine ancestor could resist a divine ancestor. Chen Zong was not a divine ancestor, but his strength was without a doubt very strong. Not long after, Chen Zong rushed out of the Vermilion Bird Holy Land and quickly flew away. The divine ancestor Tianfeng also quickly chased after him. The wind between heaven and earth constantly attacked Chen Zong, causing him to feel great pressure. He constantly unleashed his sword will and slashed through the wind with the heavenly will sword. The whistling sound of the wind became even more tyrannical and shocking. Every wind was filled with terrifying power, as if they had turned into sharp blades that could cut through everything. They mercilessly attacked Chen Zong. The divine ancestor Tianfeng did not show any mercy. On the one hand, he wanted to prevent Chen Zong from using any method to escape, and on the other hand, he wanted to kill him. Binding. The astonishing binding and pressure continued to press down on him. It was too strong, and even Chen Zong's inner verse could not withstand it. He felt as if he was about to be crushed. Chen Zong's eyes narrowed. Under such circumstances, he could only release the power of the sea-suppressing orb. In an instant, within the innerverse, the blue star formed by the sea-suppressing orb suddenly began to rotate. In an instant, it seemed as if it had exploded. Endless amounts of seawater rushed out, and the innerverse turned into a large sea that was turbulent. A tyrannical power spread out and was released together with the innerverse. The power of the sea-suppressing orb increased in an instant, and its range also increased. The pressure brought by the divine ancestor Tianfeng was immediately resisted, and it could no longer suppress Chen Zong. Hand over the sea-suppressing orb. The wind giant roared again. With every word that was shouted, heaven and earth seemed to tremble. However, the sound did not disperse. Instead, it condensed into a beam and blasted towards Chen Zong with a terrifying power, as if it wanted to shatter Chen Zong. The innerverse was released, and the sea-suppressing orb's terrifying sound was immediately resisted. Chen Zong's eyes became even sharper. After activating the sea-suppressing orb's power, Chen Zong was finally able to resist the divine ancestor's pressure. Being able to resist the pressure meant that he had a chance to fight the divine ancestor. However, whether or not he could fight the divine ancestor, Chen Zong still did not know, but he could give it a try. In an instant, Chen Zong gathered all the power in his body and reached the limit. Chapter 3072. The sword radiance streaked across the sky like divine lightning, shattering heaven and earth. It went straight for the giant, but the sword radiance was still very small compared to the giant. With a boom, the wind howled. The giant suddenly struck out with its palm, shattering heaven and earth. The sword radiance was also crushed. The palm was like a mountain, terrifying to the extreme. Chunzong's expression became more and more solemn. Such power made him feel that it was difficult to resist. He felt like his whole body was about to be crushed. In a flash, Chunzong immediately broke free from the shackles. His body drew an arc like a sword, bypassing the giant's palm. He rode on his sword and went straight for the giant. The core of the giant was Saint Ancestor Tianfeng. Chunzong's sword was extremely fast and sharp. The supreme sword will directly locked onto Saint Ancestor Tianfeng. The ocean-suppressing pearl merged with the inner universe and firmly resisted the pressure of Saint Ancestor Tianfeng. Even with the ocean-suppressing pearl, you are no match for me. Saint Ancestor Tianfeng's voice blasted at Chunzong again. Every word contained the terrifying power of the great path of Tianfeng, crushing everything. Perhaps this was the truth, but Chunzong would not give up and admit defeat. Fight. He fought with all his strength against the Saint Ancestor. The ocean-suppressing pearl's power allowed him to resist the impact of Saint Ancestor Tianfeng's great path. Thus, he had the ability to swing his sword at his opponent. He was not a Saint Ancestor, but he still swung his sword at him. How courageous! Slash. 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 Chunzong used the single heart sword technique. Slash after slash, sword after sword after sword, continuously attacked Saint Ancestor Tianfeng, who was inside the giant. Under the control of Saint Ancestor Tianfeng, the giant was extremely agile. Every strike was extremely powerful, crushing the sword radiance. It was invincible. In the distance, the people of the Vermilion Bird Holy Land and ancient Phoenix Mountain were all shocked. The unparalleled sword saint is so strong. That's a Saint Ancestor, a Saint Ancestor. Where did this Saint Ancestor come from? The number of divine ancestors in the land territory of the ancient mystical world was very limited. Therefore, every divine ancestor had their own background and would not appear out of nowhere. This was especially true for great sages who knew more about divine ancestors. However, they did not know about this divine ancestor who could control the wind of heaven and earth. Where did he come from? Was he an old monster who had been in seclusion for many years? The land domain and the sea domain were mostly saints and below, to the saints who came mainly to explore the sea. After all, the saint ancestor. To the saint ancestor too. The sword light continued to slash out, one after another, as if it wanted to cut everything into pieces. However, it still couldn't do anything to divine ancestor Tianfeng. In the end, it was still not powerful enough to hit him. Chunzong had already realized that if he wanted to hit Saint Ancestor Skywind, he would first have to break through the wind giant. However, the wind giant was too strong. It was indestructible and indestructible, yet it could switch between illusion and reality. Sure enough, it's still not enough, Chunzong said to himself. Even so, Chunzong had no intention of retreating. For a time, the Skywind sacred ancestor couldn't do anything to Chunzong. Anger. Saint Ancestor Tianfeng was infuriated. Endless gusts of wind blew from all directions and gathered around him. Because the wind giant began to swell. In an instant, it grew from 1,000 meters to 3,000 meters tall. It became even more gigantic. It was as majestic as a mountain. It stood between heaven and earth, stirring up clouds and repelling the vacuum. The terrifying might of the way became even more intense and multiplied. The universe around Chunzong was suddenly suppressed and kept shrinking. However, with a treasure like the sea-suppressing pearl, he was able to withstand it in the end. It was just that moving became more and more difficult. Skywind. Saint Ancestor Tianfeng's voice seemed to be accompanied by endless howling winds. It rang out between heaven and earth. In an instant, an incomparably huge finger appeared between heaven and earth. It was surrounded by endless storms, as if it was going to shatter the earth. It pointed directly at Chenzong. The might of this finger was extremely shocking. The sky was directly shattered and the void was broken. However, it silently pointed at Chenzong. It was blocked by the sea-suppressing pearl and the universe outside. However, the sea-suppressing pearl and the universe outside could only block it for a moment. They couldn't completely block it. They were instantly broken inch by inch, and Chenzong was suddenly hit. The huge finger was at least 100 meters long. It shot down from the sky like a tyrannical meteor. Chenzong's body suddenly fell down and directly hit the ground, sinking deep into the ground. The terrifying power kept attacking, but it was absorbed by the cosmic true body. However, the tyrannical power couldn't be completely absorbed. A part of it hit Chenzong's body. His chi and blood were shaken, and he couldn't stop vomiting blood. His whole body was in excruciating pain, as if it was going to be torn apart. In the universe, a huge storm suddenly rushed in. Wherever it passed, all the stars suddenly shook violently, and cracks appeared. The 10,000 starlights also became dim, as if they were going to be extinguished. Injury. Chenzong was directly injured by the finger. Even with the sea-suppressing pearl, he was still no match for the divine ancestor. Sure enough, the gap between a great saint and a divine ancestor was very significant. In the underground pit, Chenzong's injuries were quickly recovering. The cosmic true body was still very strong. Otherwise, without it, the saint ancestor Tianfeng's attack would have killed him. However, even with the cosmic true body's absorption and defense, he was still seriously injured. Sure enough, once the divine ancestor got serious, his strength was still very tyrannical. However, the saint ancestor Tianfeng was even more shocked. The attack just now was his full-strength attack, but it didn't kill his opponent. In an instant, the saint ancestor Tianfeng's heart was burning. The sea-suppressing pearl. The sea-suppressing pearl was a supreme treasure. If he could get it, he would be invincible. No one would be his match, except for the divine ancestor who had a supreme treasure. The large hand descended from the sky and directly grabbed at the hole that Chenzong had fallen into. The terrifying pressure immediately caused the ground to crack and collapse. Soon after, a body was pulled out from the hole. Hand over the sea-suppressing pearl. The saint ancestor Tianfeng's voice rang out again, but it didn't spread out. Instead, it directly blasted into Chenzong's ears, as if it wanted to blow Chenzong's head to pieces. The sea-suppressing pearl was a supreme treasure. This news couldn't be spread. Otherwise, it might attract the other divine ancestors and intensify the competition. Chenzong's injuries were quickly recovering. He gathered his strength again, and the sea-suppressing pearl's power burst out again. 3 times the power of the divine firmament, he broke free from the saint ancestor Tianfeng's restraint. He turned into a sword light and rushed into the sky, quickly escaping. The saint ancestor Tianfeng roared. The wind of heaven and earth roared and suddenly turned into a prison, binding Chenzong. The great Tao in the prison was chaotic, and so was the space-time, so Chenzong couldn't use space-time travel to escape. 3 times the power of the divine firmament, the sword light broke through the sky. It was extremely powerful and sharp, and it immediately cut through the binding of the prison of wind and rushed out. However, layers of wind came raging, completely controlled by the saint ancestor Tianfeng. The continuous pressure made Chenzong feel exhausted. His mixed yuan heart force was constantly consumed, and his recovery speed couldn't keep up. The situation was critical. Chenzong was caught again. The giant of wind's huge palm had completely bound Chenzong, and he couldn't move. His mixed yuan heart force had been used up too much, and he couldn't use it again. The saint ancestor Tianfeng's eyes were extremely cold. There seemed to be countless storms in his eyes, as if it was a world of wind. Immediately, the Giant of Wind also exerted force in an instant. Chen Zong's true body of the universe was constantly suppressed, and he was also constantly resisting and absorbing the pressure. In the inner universe, the wind whistled and swept all the stars away. The starlight was destroyed, and the entire inner universe was in chaos. Chen Zong's injuries hadn't healed yet, and he was severely injured again. He spat out blood, and cracks appeared on his body. The Saint Ancestor Tianfeng wanted to kill Chen Zong directly. After killing him, he could take away the sea-suppressing pearl. Otherwise, Chen Zong had to take the initiative to remove the seal on the sea-suppressing pearl. Clearly, Chen Zong did not intend to remove the mark of the sea-suppressing orb, so Sacred Ancestor Tianfeng wanted to kill him. Chen Zong knew that even if he removed the mark of the sea-suppressing orb, Sacred Ancestor Tianfeng would not let him go. In that case, why would he take the initiative to remove it? Spitting out another mouthful of blood, Chen Zong's expression was cold. His mind was spinning, trying to think of a way to break out of this situation. How could he break out of this situation? For a moment, Chen Zong couldn't think of anything. Suddenly, an earth-shattering sword chime sounded, as if it came from a distant place. It became clearer and clearer, and a sword will burst out, as if it was descending from space. In the sky, a spot of light appeared and bloomed. It was as dazzling as starlight, and the endless tyrannical sword will also surged at the moment the starlight bloomed. Inside the Giant of Wind, the Saint Ancestor Tianfeng's expression changed drastically. The starlight fell at an extremely fast speed with a monstrous sword will, tearing the sky apart. Fast. It was extremely fast. Not only was it fast, but the power contained within it was also extremely frightening, extremely frightening. It's coming. The Flying Star Sword Saint of the Stars Sword Palace was surprised. It was too fast. The starlight was too fast. When it fell, they discovered that it was a sword light. It was like a falling star, and its power was endless. It was as if the sword could shatter the earth. Without hesitation, the 3,000-meter-tall Giant of Wind suddenly waved its other arm, bursting out an extremely shocking power. It pointed a finger at the starlight sword light, as if it could shatter the sky. The roar was earth-shattering. The star was shattered, and so was the finger of the Giant of Wind. Its huge body immediately retreated a few steps, and with each step the ground shook and cracked. "Who are you?" The Saint Ancestor Tianfeng looked serious, because the sword just now told him that it was a Saint Ancestor who had made a move. The star's sword ancestor. As the voice sounded, another star appeared, and it instantly shone brightly, as if it had turned into a star. The light was extremely dazzling, and the sword will also burst out in an instant, rushing down. The second sword strike was even more powerful, like a real star crashing down. It was so huge that it seemed to fill the whole world. The Saint Ancestor Tianfeng's expression changed drastically. Chapter 3073. The star's sword ancestor arrived and attacked the sky wind Saint Ancestor. The sword was like a star falling from the distant sky. The star filled the sky and bombarded the ground. It kept spinning and spewing out endless sword chi. It was as bright as starlight. The 3,000-meter-tall Giant of Wind suddenly let out an earth-shattering roar. He suddenly clenched his fist tightly, as if he could shatter the sky and shatter everything. Then, he unleashed his full strength and unleashed an extremely terrifying attack, blasting towards the huge star that was falling from the sky. Another collision occurred. This time, the star did not shatter. Instead, it continued to spin and attack. However, the 3,000-meter-tall wind giant held on. Its huge fist was pressed against the sword-light star, and it did not retreat. A figure suddenly rushed out of the sword-light star. He seemed to be bathed in starlight. He suddenly slashed with his sword and cut off the other finger of the Giant of Wind. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Chen Zong immediately turned his power into sword light and flew to the side. Although Chernzong was surprised that the star's sword ancestor would come in person, he was not stunned. This was a battle between divine ancestors, a battlefield between divine ancestors. Even with the help of the sea-suppressing pearl, his strength was still lacking. The star's sword ancestor stood in the air. With a sword in hand, starlight illuminated the surroundings. As he swung his sword, the starlight immediately turned into streaks of dazzling sword chi. They shot down from the sky and shot towards the wind giant. The 3,000-meter-tall giant of wind was the best target. With a furious roar, boundless wind suddenly swept over and revolved around the wind giant, forming a wind barrier that firmly protected the wind giant. It blocked the bombardment of the 10,000 sword chi, causing countless ripples to appear on the barrier. Chernzong flew away and stopped to watch the battle from afar. At the same time, he recovered his strength and injuries. He saw the star's sword ancestor attack. Every sword move contained an extreme mystery. It was the mystery of the star's sword principle. The inheritance of the star's sword palace was the star's sword principle. The star's sword ancestor was the most outstanding expert in the star's sword principle. He was the only expert who had deduced the star's sword principle to an extremely high level. Every sword strike brought Chernzong an incomparable feeling and impact. It was a feeling that directly impacted his heart, a feeling that moved him. Chernzong could tell that each of the star's sword ancestors' seemingly casual sword attacks actually contained the profoundness of the prodigious astral myriad sword art. Or it could be said that it was the prodigious astral myriad sword art. It was just that he had cultivated it to an extremely high level. How many levels were there in the prodigious star's sword art? In fact, Chernzong was not very clear. It seemed to be limited but also infinite. If one was capable enough, one could continuously deduce and improve it to an extremely high level. The third level, that. Watching the battle, Chernzong's inspiration exploded from the star's sword ancestor's sword technique. His understanding of the prodigious astral myriad sword technique improved by leaps and bounds. It was as if a gate had been opened, and his inspiration turned into a torrent. The feeling of epiphany. Again and again. Breaking through from the inner world to the inner universe was a qualitative change. It was a kind of transcendence in cultivation and realm. This kind of transcendence did not only bring about an increase in strength, but also an obvious improvement in other aspects. For example, it would be easier to comprehend the mystery. For example, it would be difficult for an ordinary child to lift a 100-pound object. It might even be impossible. However, if the child grew up and became a youth, it would be much easier for him to lift a 100-pound object. Similarly, in the inner world. When comprehending the mysteries of swordsmanship in the inner world, Chernzong's comprehension of it had reached a certain limit. For example, Chernzong had comprehended the third layer of the prodigious astral sword technique, which was the upper limit of what he could comprehend in the inner world. Now that he had broken through to the innerverse, Chernzong focused on comprehending and improving the single-hearted sword technique. He no longer invested any time or energy into the prodigious astral sword technique. This was because the single-hearted swordsmanship was his foundation. All other swordsmanships existed for the single-hearted swordsmanship. They existed to improve the single-hearted swordsmanship and make it stronger. But now, after witnessing the prodigious star's sword art with his own eyes, Chernzong was greatly inspired. With his extremely high comprehension ability and solid swordsmanship foundation, as well as his high realm as a prerequisite, Chernzong's eyes flickered. The mystery of swordsmanship continued to emerge. In an instant, the prodigious star's sword art broke through from the third level to the fourth level, catching up to the power of the single-hearted swordsmanship. The single-hearted swordsmanship was Chernzong's main swordsmanship. Of course, he would spend most of his time and energy on the single-hearted swordsmanship. However, the prodigious star's sword art was a supreme secret swordsmanship. It was very superior. If he improved it, he would have more ways to deal with his enemies. At the same time, it could be used as a resource to improve the single-hearted swordsmanship. Chen Zong would not miss such a good opportunity. This was a battle between two sword ancestors. It was very rare. The Saint Ancestor Tianfeng was also very powerful. Under his control, every strike of the Giant of Wind seemed to be able to shatter the heavens and the earth. Every collision caused the surrounding void to shatter completely. Terrifying turbulence poured out crazily like a mountain flood. Everything in the surroundings was completely flooded. The earth cracked, turning into dust and powder. The destructive power of a divine ancestor's battle was too strong and terrifying. If it was in the outer universe, such destructive power would be enough to break and shatter a star. However, the inner universe was more than 100 times stronger than the outer universe. It was a qualitative improvement. Therefore, it was more difficult to destroy. An attack that could destroy a star in the outer universe could only destroy a mountain in the inner universe. The battle became more and more intense. Although they were both divine ancestors, there was a gap between them. However, Chen Zong could see that the prodigious star's sword art clearly had the upper hand and was gradually suppressing the Saint Ancestor Tianfeng. In the next moment, the prodigious star's sword art's body seemed to expand from the original size of an ordinary person to 1,000 meters tall. No, it was not the prodigious star's sword art's body that was expanding. Instead, it was the endless starlight that condensed into a giant, 1,000 meters tall giant. 1,000 meters tall was obviously not as tall as the Giant of Wind, which was 3,000 meters tall. However, the difference in size was reduced. The 1,000-meter-tall starlight giant held a 100-meter-long starlight sword and slashed out an attack that could destroy the heavens and the earth. Slash. Thousands of starlight exploded. The endless starlight sword seemed to strike down from the highest point of the sky. This strike alone was enough to shatter everything. This strike shocked everyone. The moment the sword struck down, the day turned into night. Only the sword light became more and more dazzling and dazzling. Took away all the brilliance in the world. The Giant of Wind roared again. Its 3,000-meter-tall body shrunk to 1,000 meters in an instant. Although it shrunk and its body became smaller, it looked more condensed. The aura it emitted also became more powerful. Vaguely, endless wind surrounded it, as if it was about to transform into an armor. The Giant of Wind, which was becoming more condensed and more powerful, raised its arms and stretched out. A gust of wind condensed into a long spear. The nearly 1,000-meter-long spear seemed to have gathered all the power of the wind in the world. It suddenly pierced out, shattering the world. Chen Zong's pupils shrank to the size of needles. The Saint Ancestor of Sky Wind was so powerful. When he fought with him just now, the Saint Ancestor of Sky Wind had not used all his skills. Was the Saint Ancestor so powerful? The huge sword light slashed down and the long spear pierced through the air. In an instant, the long spear was shattered and exploded. It turned into countless gusts of wind that wreaked havoc. Everything was torn apart. The remaining half of the starry sword light continued to slash at the Giant of Wind. It broke the wind wall on the Giant of Wind's body. Layers of terrifying power continued to attack the Giant of Wind, but the Giant of Wind closed its palms and pressed them down firmly. It was as if it was holding a white sword with its bare hands. The Saint Ancestor of Sky Wind looked very serious. He used all his strength to close his palms together and press down the Star Sword Ancestor's sword. Immediately, the sword that was pressed down by the Saint Ancestor of Sky Wind shattered in an instant. It turned into countless sword lights that sputtered like stars. The shattered starlight sword light soared into the sky. In an instant, it was as if the stars had appeared in the daytime. There were 10,000 of them, and they all bloomed with extremely dazzling brilliance. They then gathered and turned into a huge starlight sword that descended from the sky. The sword that fell from the sky, the earth-shattering sword, the invincible sword, suddenly hit the head of the wind giant, shattering it like a hot knife through butter. The giant of wind collapsed inch by inch, as if it was unable to resist. A figure also broke away from the giant of wind in an instant and rushed out. As the figure rushed out, the giant of wind seemed to have lost its support and shattered directly. It turned into countless gusts of wind that dissipated and rolled up a monstrous storm that covered a radius of 100 miles. This kind of power was tyrannical and unparalleled. Even though they were hundreds of miles apart, Chen Zong still felt an astonishing pressure. It was a suffocating pressure. It was certain that quasi-saints would be torn to shreds by the dispersing storm within 100 miles. Even pristine Saint Realm experts wouldn't be able to get any benefits and would suffer minor injuries. Only great Saint Realm experts wouldn't be affected at all. In an instant, a figure broke out with extreme speed that surpassed everything. It was as if it ignored the restrictions of time and space as it approached rapidly. Chen Zong's expression changed drastically. He did not hesitate to use space-time travel and appeared 10,000 meters away. Then, he turned into a sword light and immediately fled far away. This was because the figure was Saint Ancestor Tianfeng. He had just broken away from the star's sword ancestor's attack and was rushing toward Chen Zong. His purpose was obvious. He wanted to capture Chen Zong. He was determined to get the sea-suppressing pearl. A cold snort was heard in an instant. Then, a beam of starlight that traversed the space-time with unparalleled sharpness shot toward Saint Ancestor Tianfeng mercilessly. Saint Ancestor Tianfeng's expression was ugly. After glaring fiercely at Chen Zong, he turned into a gust of wind and flew in different directions. With the star's sword ancestor here, who was indeed stronger than him, it was impossible for him to capture Chen Zong under such circumstances. He could only give up for the time being. However, he must get the sea-suppressing pearl as soon as possible. The longer he delayed, the more disadvantageous it would be. Seeing that Saint Ancestor Tianfeng had turned into a gust of wind and fled, the star's sword ancestor did not chase after him. His purpose here was only to help Chen Zong. Moreover, Saint Ancestor Tianfeng was very strong and was not much weaker than him. He might be able to suppress Saint Ancestor Tianfeng, but it would be very difficult to truly defeat him. Chapter 3074. Thank you, Sword Master. In the sky, Chen Zong saluted the starry figure from afar. This time, if the star's sword master hadn't come and attacked, he would have been in big trouble. He might have been killed by the Tianfeng divine ancestor. As for the ocean-suppressing pearl, needless to say, it would have been taken away. A divine ancestor is very strong. You're still far from it. You shouldn't provoke him, the star's sword master said directly. Come back to the Sword Palace and find me as soon as possible. As soon as he finished speaking, the star's sword master's body instantly shattered, turning into countless specks of starlight that shot in all directions. Under Chen Zong's gaze, he disappeared. Chen Zong saluted again. He wasn't angry at the star's sword master's direct words at all. In fact, he didn't want to provoke the Tianfeng divine ancestor. The Tianfeng divine ancestor had his eyes on the ocean-suppressing pearl and was determined to get it. Coincidentally, the ocean-suppressing pearl was obtained by him. The battle just now was extremely intense and shocking. The destruction it caused spread for hundreds of miles. The ground was completely destroyed. Countless cracks and craters were everywhere. There were still remnants of powerful sword intent and the great path of Tianfeng divine ancestors' aura. This remnant aura could last for hundreds of years. It was very difficult for anyone below the saint level to enter. It was very terrifying. However, at the same time, it was a very good place for sword cultivators and cultivators who comprehended the great path of wind to comprehend. First, Chen Zong and the Tianfeng divine ancestor fought. Then, Chen Zong was defeated and captured by the Tianfeng divine ancestor. Then, the Star's Sword Master arrived and attacked the Tianfeng Divine Ancestor with his sword. The entire process was actually very short. However, such a battle shocked everyone, including the Vermilion Bird Divine Ancestor, who was a supreme saint. It was too rare to see a battle between divine ancestors because divine ancestors rarely fought. For example, the Vermilion Bird Divine Ancestor of the Vermilion Bird Holy Land was always sleeping to increase his strength. Of course, the speed of increase was very slow. It took a long time for him to increase his strength. However, if there was a great danger that affected the Vermilion Bird Holy Land that the Vermilion Bird Divine Ancestor couldn't deal with, he would have to awaken the Vermilion Bird Divine Ancestor. However, such opportunities were extremely rare. The Flying Star Sword Saint exclaimed as he looked at Chen Zong with a smile. The arrival of the Star's Sword Master was precisely because he had used the Star's Sword Palace's unique method to send out the news. Originally, he had intended for the Star's Sword Palace to send out a great saint expert. Unexpectedly, the Star's Sword Master had come personally. Chen Zong smiled at the Flying Star Sword Saint and bowed slightly before flying towards the ancient Phoenix Divine Maiden. "Let's go to the Stellar Sword Palace first," Chen Zong said directly to the ancient Phoenix Divine Maiden. Initially, he had planned to bring the ancient Phoenix Divine Maiden to the ancient Phoenix Mountain to find the ancient Phoenix Ancestor to solve the mystery. However, Chen Zong knew how terrifying a divine ancestor was. What's more, he had just defeated the ancient Phoenix Old Ancestor's avatar, so he would definitely be targeted by the other party. If he went to the ancient Phoenix Mountain, it would be the same as walking right into a trap. Placing one's hopes on the mercy of the strong? Chen Zong didn't dare and wasn't willing to rely on luck. In the end, he still had to rely on himself. He would go to the Star's Sword Palace first. In any case, he was an honorary elder of the Star's Sword Palace and had some connections with the Star's Sword Palace. In addition, the Star's Sword Master had also asked Chen Zong to go to the Star's Sword Palace before he left. In that case, he would go there. He had the sea-suppressing pearl with him. The Heavenly Wind Divine Ancestor wouldn't give up so easily. Also, was the Sea Emperor also looking for him? Originally, Chen Zong had thought that with his current strength, he would be able to resist a divine ancestor. Only now did he realize that it was impossible. Not yet, his strength wasn't at that level. Then, even if the Sea Emperor came to the land domain, he would be somewhat affected, but that was only relative to the divine ancestor level. To him, there wasn't much of a difference. The divine ancestor was really strong. Even with the sea-suppressing pearl in hand, he was still no match for him. However, Chen Zong wouldn't belittle himself. In essence, he had only broken through to the level of the Innerverse. In comparison, he was equivalent to a pristine saint. At this level, he could resist a great saint. With the help of the sea-suppressing pearl, he could even suppress most great saints. This was very shocking. If the cultivation of the Innerverse was further improved, then his strength would become even more tyrannical. Perhaps, when the cultivation of the Innerverse reached a certain level, he would have a chance to defeat a divine ancestor without the help of the sea-suppressing pearl. Another point was that the sea-suppressing pearl hadn't been completely refined. This meant that he couldn't activate the full power of the sea-suppressing pearl. In theory, a supreme treasure actually corresponded to the level of a divine ancestor. A supreme treasure that activated its full power could, to a certain extent, be comparable to a divine ancestor. Although this was the case, it was very difficult to completely refine it. At least, Chen Zong felt that he was at a bottleneck now. It was difficult to make progress, and he didn't know when he would be able to completely refine it. This wasn't something that could be rushed. Although the ancient Phoenix Divine Maiden hadn't regained her memories, she didn't reject Chen Zong's suggestion. This was because she had a thought in her heart, and that was that she trusted Chen Zong. Towards the ancient Phoenix Mountain, The ancient phoenix divine maiden had an inexplicable feeling. It seemed to be fear. Blue phoenix, you can't leave. The golden phoenix grand sage stopped her. Move! Chunzong's eyes narrowed and a cold light shot out. It pierced through the sky and caused the golden phoenix grand sage's expression to change. He couldn't help but take a step back and his aura started to gather. The golden phoenix grand sage had witnessed all of Chunzong's previous battles with his own eyes. Chunzong's strength far surpassed his own. If they really fought, the golden phoenix grand sage would not be able to gain any advantage. However, he could not let Chunzong take the ancient phoenix divine maiden away. Holy Master, the ancient phoenix mountain has no ill intentions. The divine maiden must stay. The golden phoenix grand sage looked at the holy master of the vermilion bird holy master and tried to get him to stop Chunzong from taking the ancient phoenix divine maiden away. I will report this matter to the grand elder. When the time comes, the grand elder will communicate with the ancient phoenix grand elder. The holy master of the vermilion bird holy master replied. Chunzong was very strong and had the help of the stellar sword master. He didn't want to deal with Chunzong again, unless he woke up the vermilion bird grand elder. However, if he woke up the vermilion bird grand elder, would the stellar sword master still attack? He couldn't guess the thoughts of a divine ancestor. Therefore, without the vermilion bird holy master's interference, the golden phoenix grand sage and the rest of the ancient phoenix mountain had no choice but to let Chunzong take their divine maiden away and head towards the stellar sword palace. As for the two maidservants of the ancient phoenix divine maiden, he didn't bring them along. There was no need to. In the ruins of Green Sword City, a spell formation was set up and sealed. It was pitch black, absolute black, like an abyss of darkness. At this moment, 5 figures stood in front of the spell formation. They were 1 sword sage and 4 demi-sages. The 5 of them came from the 4 great holy lands of the Way of the Sword. They were here to guard this place and prevent any accidents from happening. Especially if the demons crossed over into this world again, they could use special methods to inform the 4 great holy lands of the Way of the Sword. The 4 great holy lands of the Way of the Sword would respond immediately and send out their sword masters. The demons were powerful. No matter how much they valued them, it wouldn't be too much. However, at this moment, the 5 sword cultivators who were in charge of guarding this place had an indescribable look of indifference on their faces. They were indifferent to the extreme, as if they had become numb. However, their eyes were pitch black and seemed to contain an indescribable fanaticism. Let's begin. For the descent of our God. The sword sage's numb face seemed to be pulled by invisible fingers. His expression was very strange and his tone was very stiff. However, it contained an indescribable fanaticism. For the descent of our God. The other 4 quasi-saint sword cultivators were the same. Their faces were numb and their cheeks were twitching as they spoke stiff, empty, and fanatical words. In an instant, wisps of black aura rose from the 4 quasi-saint sword cultivators. It was constantly spreading, turning into one and directly rushing into the sword sage's body. The bodies of the 4 quasi-saint sword cultivators became shriveled like dried corpses that had been dead for a long time. It was as if they would be blown away by a gust of wind. After receiving the infusion of the 4 auras, the sword sage's body seemed to swell up. His strength also surged in an instant, surpassing his own limit and reaching a higher level. Originally, the sword sage was a veteran pristine saint. His strength had reached the peak of the pristine saint realm. Now that he had received the support of the 4 quasi-saint sword cultivators, he directly broke through his limit and reached the great saint realm. Even if he had just entered the great saint realm, he was still a true great saint realm. There was a gap between him and the pristine saint realm. The sword sage's face seemed to become increasingly numb, but his eyes became deeper and more fanatical. It was a very contradictory combination that was indescribably strange. My God, I open the way with my life. The fanatical words sounded like a chant. Then, the sword sage pulled out his sword. His strength also turned into a strong black aura and poured into the long sword. The long sword was a middle-grade sacred artifact. Its own strength was also constantly stimulated. Slash. Without holding back, the sword sage slashed at the formation with his sword. It was a sword with his full strength. He did not hold back at all, because there was only one sword. This was a sword slash with his own life. It was a sword slash with his own great Tao as the price. It also carried everything of the 4 quasi-saint sword cultivators. The power of this sword was also unleashed to the extreme. It was also extremely tyrannical in the great saint realm. It was an extreme sword light. The incomparably dark sword light directly slashed at a certain part of the formation. Suddenly, it slashed through layers of the formation. After the sword sage slashed with his sword, his entire body rapidly shriveled. When he reached the ground, he directly shattered and turned into dust particles. The sword light that slashed out was indomitable. The sword also turned dark and was full of cracks. Then, it shattered as if it was weathered. It was exhausted. The middle-grade sacred artifact long sword was also completely exhausted. It exhausted all the strength of the sword sage and the sword. At the price of the great Tao, it slashed out an earth-shattering sword. However, under the operation of the formation, it was still constantly resisting the slash of the sword and constantly weakening its strength. According to the situation, the sword would not be able to slash through the formation and would eventually be exhausted. Just as the power of the sword was about to disappear, the darkness in the center of the formation suddenly fluctuated violently. A tall figure vaguely appeared. Then, as if a great sun had risen, it came across the sky and pressed down in the same direction as the sword light. Chapter 3075. When Chernzong arrived at the Starry Sword Palace with the ancient Phoenix Divine Maiden, the palace master of the Starry Sword Palace led a group of elders to welcome them. This was Chernzong's second visit to the Starry Sword Palace. The first time he came was because of the invasion of the immortal and demon realm. He came to inform them and entered the Starry Sword Palace to cultivate. 100 years passed in a flash and he finally became an honorary elder of the Starry Sword Palace. This was the second time he came, and his strength was completely different. Therefore, the palace master personally led a group of elders to welcome him. He was an elite who could suppress the Vermilion Bird Holy Land. Other than the Vermilion Bird ancestor, even the Vermilion Bird Holy Land's inherited secret treasure, the Vermilion Bird Heavenly Flames, was no match for him. He could even contend with an unknown divine ancestor. Although he was defeated in the end, it also showed how powerful Chernzong was. Such strength was not inferior to the palace master of the Starry Sword Palace in the slightest. In fact, he was even a little stronger. The strong would always be respected no matter where they were. Even those who committed all sorts of crimes and were extremely ruthless would always be respected and revered. As for whether the ancient Phoenix Divine Maiden would offend the ancient Phoenix Mountain because of this, the palace master of the Starry Sword Palace did not care. The ancient Phoenix Mountain was not weak, but the Starry Sword Palace was stronger than the Vermilion Bird Holy Land. Chernzong was an honorary elder of the Starry Sword Palace, and he had shown amazing strength not long ago. Therefore, he was treated very well in the Starry Sword Palace. After making arrangements for the ancient Phoenix Divine Maiden, Yunyenshin, Chernzong followed the palace master of the Starry Sword Palace to meet the Starry Sword Palace master. The Starry Sword Palace master's cave was half a space. Half was connected to the ancient mystic world, and the other half was independent. It was like a small world. After this small world was obtained, it was constantly modified. Now, the modification was complete. When Chernzong stepped in, he was still very surprised. Sky, starlight. This was the scene of this small world. It sounded simple, but the scene was very spectacular. It was indescribably beautiful and contained endless mysteries. In this place, Chernzong could feel the aura of the Great Path. The aura of the Great Path of the Stars was very strong. This was the cave dwelling of the Stars' Sword Master. Or rather, it was the cave dwelling of the past Stars' Sword Masters. After many modifications, it had long been perfected, becoming a complete small world. You've come. The Stars' Sword Master sat in a very simple pavilion. There was a guqin in front of him. He placed his hands on the guqin, and as his fingers played, a pleasant tinkling sound rang out. It was like water and wind. After the Stars' Sword Master said those words, he didn't say anything else. Chernzong didn't disturb him. He just stood in a corner of the pavilion and listened attentively to the Stellar Sword Master's performance. He had never heard this piece of music before, or perhaps it wasn't really a piece of music. It didn't seem to have any order, but it wasn't messy either. Unknowingly, Chernzong and the Palace Master of Stars' Sword Palace were immersed in the music. The feeling was incomparably wonderful. Although Chernzong was immersed in the music, he didn't lose himself. Instead, he became more and more clear-headed, and his eyes became brighter and brighter. Gradually, Chernzong felt that the music was like the sound of a sword. It was as if the Stars' Sword Master was using the guqin as a sword to interpret the mysteries of the way of the Stars' Sword. Originally, it was night in this small world. There were only specks of starlight in the sky, blinking like eyes. They shone incessantly, but they were very sparse. However, as the music of the guqin drifted out, the simple but charming pavilion fluttered in the night sky with the night wind. In an instant, specks of starlight appeared in the sparse night sky again. In just 10 breaths of time, they became dense again, and countless specks of starlight adorned the sky. An indescribable mysterious aura also spread out from the stars in the night sky. Chernzong felt the profoundness of the prodigious astral myriad sword art. Then, a bright moon bloomed in the night sky. The light was bright and serene, containing a kind of tranquility. The bright moon hung in the sky. Stars were the Great Way. The bright moon was also the Great Way. However, in essence, the bright moon was also a kind of star. The bright moon hung in the sky, and moonlight poured down from afar. It was all-pervasive, like mercury flowing down the ground. At the same time, it also symbolized that the power was difficult to isolate, like the silent spring rain that moistened everything. Standing under the moonlight, Chernzong could clearly feel the moonlight shrouding his body. Suddenly, he had a feeling that the moonlight was penetrating. This penetrating feeling silently brought with it a kind of power that invaded his body. It contained the power of the sword. Once it exploded, it would cause terrible damage. Chernzong was very clear about this feeling and this mystery. It was the 4th level of the Stellar Sword Technique. The 3rd level of the Stellar Sword Technique could evolve 10,000 stars and condense the minor star sword realm. That was a pseudo-domain of the Great Way. It was very strong in the Little Saint realm, but it was not as strong as the Great Way domain of the Great Saint realm. The 4th level of the Stellar Sword Technique was called the Minor Star Sword realm. It was strengthened to a stronger level, and it was closer to the level of the Great Way domain. It could be said that the pseudo-Great Way domain born from the 4th level of the Stellar Sword Technique already had half of the power of the real Great Way domain. If one could comprehend the 5th level of the Stellar Sword Technique, one would be able to evolve the Minor Star Sword realm into the Stellar Sword realm. That would be the Great Way domain, the real Great Way domain. Chernzong had cultivated the Stellar Sword Technique to the 4th level. This was all thanks to the comprehension he had gained from watching the battle between the Stellar Sword Master and Saint Ancestor Tianfeng. But now, as he listened to the Stellar Sword Master's guqin play, it caused the profound changes in this small world and evolved the 4th level of the Stellar Sword Technique. It was so clear and direct. Now, the Stellar Sword Master's Stellar Sword Way was very brilliant in the battle between him and Saint Ancestor Tianfeng. It had already broken through the limits of the Stellar Sword Technique. It was only because the stellar sword technique actually only had 5 levels, and the stellar sword master had surpassed the 5th level. He had fused it into one, and his level was much higher. Therefore, he could only comprehend part of it. Now it was different. It was only the 4th level. It was displayed from the 3rd level, and it gave Chen Zong a more direct and clear feeling. It was as if he was walking forward step by step, and going further, instead of standing at the end directly. The bright moon shone in the sky. The moonlight was quiet and beautiful, and it contained the sword might of a spring breeze. Afterwards, the moon changed. Chen Zong could clearly sense that the moon was changing. It seemed to be expanding, growing larger and larger. Its light also grew brighter and brighter. Its originally white color was changing as well. It was dyed with a sliver of red, and it gradually deepened. The moon was changing into a true sun. It was also increasing from the 4th level of the stellar sword technique to the 5th level. The 4th level was still the minor star sword realm, but the 5th level was the true stellar sword realm. It was a qualitative change. In an instant, the bright moon turned into a scorching sun, suspended in the sky and burning fiercely. The inextinguishable fire of the sun seemed to be able to burn everything. The heat and light it released became more and more intense, and it was extremely shocking. The thousands of stars dimmed in an instant, and they could not even be seen. Above the sky, only the burning true sun shone in all directions. Chen Zong could feel that the light and heat emitted by the true sun were sword might. The overwhelming sword might was so direct, so domineering, and so fierce. It was a kind of supreme power that was like the thunder from the 9th heaven breaking the sky and shattering the mountains and the earth. It was also like the eruption of an ancient volcano that had been accumulating power for thousands of years, shattering the earth and shattering the sky. This kind of sword might was so terrifying. It was different from the bright moon sword might at the 4th level. It wasn't as subtle and subtle. Instead, it was majestic and domineering. It was telling you that this was how I wanted to crush you. Domineering, violent, explosive, unparalleled and invincible. It was so domineering that it could shatter and incinerate everything. The world seemed to be incinerated, and there was no way to resist. Chen Zong suddenly thought of something. The sun was a star, and a star was also a star. When this thought came to his mind, Chen Zong suddenly had an indescribable feeling of inspiration. The mystery of the stellar sword technique also became deeper and deeper, and it continued to improve on the foundation of the 4th level. The star's sword master didn't stop. He continued to play the guqin, which seemed to have no rhythm at all. The true sun became even more intense, blazing to the extreme. The light was everywhere. The entire world seemed to be enveloped by it, and everything disappeared. But in the next breath, all the light suddenly disappeared. That true sun rapidly dimmed and became dark, but it could still be seen. This was because there was still a ring of light that emitted the luster of the setting sun. However, the center was darkness, a darkness that enveloped and devoured everything. The true sun directly transformed into a black true Sunday. It was still emitting rays of light, but this kind of light was black. This kind of black wasn't darkness, it was still overbearing and astonishing, but it didn't appear violent. Bathing under the black rays of this black true sun, Chen Zong's entire body seemed to be dyed black. It was as black as ink. In the darkness, Chen Zong felt an extremely domineering but silent sword might madly invading his body. The sword might of the bright moon at the 4th level of the stellar sword technique seeped into his body silently, and the sword might of the scorching sun at the 5th level was overbearing and violent. But now, the black true sun seemed to have surpassed the 5th level, but it did not seem to have. The power of the black true sun was a combination of the sword might of the scorching sun and the sword might of the bright moon. It kept the advantages of the two and enhanced them to a new level. The domineering scorching sun and the tranquility of the bright moon were silent and irresistible destruction. Chen Zong felt it very clearly and directly, but he did not suffer any injuries. This was because the Stellar Sword Master's purpose was not to kill Chen Zong, but to talk about sword principle. The Stellar Sword Master used the sound of the guqin to interpret the celestial changes in the Stellar Sword principle, so that Chen Zong could more directly observe and comprehend the mysteries of the Stellar Sword principle. This was an unreserved teaching. Chen Zong also took this opportunity to observe and comprehend wholeheartedly. He did not want to miss out at all. Chapter 3076. The black sun silently vanished and the day arrived. The sun and moon were interchanging. Afterwards, Chen Zong also saw the arrival of spring as the Star's Sword Master played his zither. Everything came back to life in that instant. Seeds broke out of the ground and began to grow. When spring quietly passed, a series of rumbling sounds resounded throughout the heavens and earth. Thunder raged endlessly, vast and mighty in all directions, bringing along layers of dark clouds that filled the sky. Lightning dragons and snakes traversed through the black clouds in all directions, as if a flood dragon was stirring up wind and waves in the vast ocean. Torrential rain fell from the sky. Bean-sized raindrops descended like the fury of the world. After the rain passed, the weather began to heat up. Summer had arrived. When summer gradually changed from heat to heat, the air became drier and drier. Wisps of desolation silently grew and spread out. Autumn. The bleakness became more and more dignified. The chill also quietly pervaded the air, descended, and gradually became heavier. A white goose feather-like thing fell from the dusky sky, fluttering about. That was a snowflake, a white snowflake. Winter arrived. White snowflakes fell from the sky, covering the world. Spring left and summer came. Summer retreated and autumn arrived. Autumn hid and winter arrived. Winter disappeared and spring appeared. This was the rotation of the 4 seasons. It had actually appeared in the Star's Sword Master's zither. Stars appeared, the sun and moon alternated, night and day alternated, and the rotation of the 4 seasons. Every single one of them contained astonishing mysteries. They belonged to the mysteries of the Tao, the mysteries of the Star's Sword Master's own Tao of the Sword. The Tao of the Star's Sword Palace was the Star's Sword Way, but it was just a general name. Different experts from the Star's Sword Palace had different Tao of the stars. Of course, it was the same in the beginning, but it would become more and more different towards the end. Stars manifested to condense the minor star's sword domain. It was the 3rd level of the prodigious astral sword art. The hanging moon was the 4th level, and the blazing sun was the 5th level. This was basically the level of the prodigious astral sword art. 10,000 layers did not refer to 10,000 layers. That was impossible. Next, it was the Great Sword Saint's own comprehension. The Star's Sword Master's comprehension was to transform into a black sun. That was the 6th level. After the black sun, it would transform into the rotation of the 4 seasons. That was the 7th level. What was the relationship between the 4 seasons and the Star's Sword Tao? Chen Zong didn't know, because his realm was indeed not at that level. Even though the way of cultivation was different, there was still a huge gap between him and the Divine Ancestor, whether in realm, cultivation, or strength. Therefore, the trip to the star microcosm this time had greatly affected Chen Zong. The benefits it brought were also very great. Work hard to improve yourself. There's not much time left for such peace. The Stellar Sword Palace Master raised his hands gently. The sound of the guqin, the seemingly unorganized but not disturbing music, came to an end. The mysteries of the stars in the universe also stopped in an instant. Everything returned to its original state, to the state when Chen Zong and the Stellar Sword Palace Master had just stepped into the stellar microcosm. Chen Zong didn't quite understand the Star's Sword Master's words, but he seemed to have grasped something. Is there not much time left for peace? Did that mean that it was going to be chaotic soon? How could he not be calm? This thought flashed through his mind, and it finally settled on the immortal and demon world. Thinking of this, Chen Zong suddenly remembered something very important. However, because of the vermilion bird Holy Sun and the ancient phoenix Divine Maiden's engagement, and the sky wind Divine Ancestors' pursuit, he had temporarily forgotten about it. In the fierce battle, Chen Zong had also temporarily forgotten about it. Now, he suddenly remembered. Since he remembered, Chen Zong immediately told him about it. The sea. The Star's Sword Master frowned. The invasion of the immortal and demon world was a big matter, an extremely big matter, and had to be taken very seriously. However, the sea was ultimately different from the land. A divine ancestor like him wouldn't easily step into the sea. Moreover, the sea's understanding of the immortal and demon world was very limited. However, this matter was very important. If the immortal and demon world really chose to enter the ancient mystic world through the sea, they would first develop in the sea. However, the sea didn't know much about the immortal and demon world. Moreover, the sea was much larger than the land and had many islands, so it would be even harder to find them if they hid. In this way, the immortal and demon world would have the opportunity to develop in the sea and eventually threaten the entire ancient mystic world. After confirming with Chen Zong again, the Star's Sword Master left with a serious expression. He had to find the Sword Masters of the other 3 Holy Lands to discuss this matter. Such a big matter was no longer something that a Sword Master like him could decide. After the Star's Sword Master left, Chen Zong temporarily settled down in the Star's Sword Palace. He was the honorary elder of the Star's Sword Palace and had his own cave abode. Yunyanxin also had her own arrangement, not to mention other things. Just the status of the ancient Phoenix Mountain Goddess was not low, let alone a pristine saint. The ancient Phoenix Goddess sat together with Chen Zong and asked softly, "Can you tell me about Yunyanxin?" She still didn't have any memories of Yunyanxin. However, judging from various signs, she might be Yunyanxin, although she was now called Gu Qinghuang. She didn't know what had happened, but it didn't stop her from being curious. Yunyanxin, what kind of person was he? She asked curiously. Sure. Chen Zong smiled faintly and started to recount the story. He started from the first time they had met during the test to enter the White Cloud Mountain. Chen Zong's face was full of smiles, and his eyes were gentle. His tone was light and lively. A kind of beautiful feeling of being immersed in memories permeated the air and affected the ancient Phoenix Divine Maiden. The ancient Phoenix Divine Maiden listened quietly, and she was also drawn into those memories. Chen Zong spoke in detail. Although it was something that happened many years ago, it still left a deep impression in Chen Zong's heart. It was like a brand. One person spoke, and the other listened quietly. The sun rose and the moon set, and the sun set and the moon rose. This was a very long story. From the first time they met to entering White Cloud Mountain together, time after time, it slowly left a deep impression. The void, the 9 heavens imperial court, the outer universe, Taihao Mountain, and so on. As he spoke, Chen Zong said for the first time that he wasn't from the ancient mystic world, but came from the outer universe. Of course, with Chen Zong's current strength, even if everyone knew that he came from the outer universe, it wouldn't be a big deal. This wasn't a bad thing in the first place. Moreover, he had enough strength to protect himself. This was a period of tranquility, a period of happiness. As he talked about the past with Yunyanxin, it was like he was constantly reminiscing. Chen Zong took out the fire element sword he got from the Divine Weapon Hall in the Poluo Sea Imperial Palace and gave it to the ancient Phoenix Goddess. This sword had the power of a high-grade Saint tool, and was very impressive. Even in a holy land like ancient Phoenix Mountain, high-grade Saint tools were very precious. Moreover, ancient Phoenix Mountain wasn't a holy land of the sword, so they didn't have any high-grade Saint-level swords. At most, they had mid-grade swords. In the entire land region of the ancient mystic world, the value of a high-grade Saint tool was very shocking. The value of a top-grade Saint tool was even more shocking, and there were very few of them in holy lands. As for supreme treasures, they were the highest level. Even holy lands might not have them. For example, the Vermilion Bird Holy Land's Vermilion Bird Heavenly Flame could only be considered a half-supreme treasure. Moreover, there were high-grade or even top-grade saint tools in Holy Lands, but they might not be suitable. The ancient Phoenix goddess liked this high-grade saint-level sword very much. It was stronger than the mid-grade saint-level sword she used, and it could increase her strength even more. This sword was called Green Brilliance. Every day, Chern Zong and the ancient Phoenix goddess spent time together. They talked about the details of Yunyanxin, and then they sparred with each other. Chern Zong was also constantly comprehending the prodigious astral 10,000 layers sword technique. This sword technique was indeed very powerful, especially after the Star's Sword Master personally demonstrated it. The inspiration it brought to Chern Zong was indescribable with words. The prodigious astral 10,000 layers sword technique improved little by little, and Chern Zong could feel that the relationship between him and the ancient Phoenix goddess was also constantly deepening. Chern Zong spent these days very comfortably. It was as if he had let go of all his restraints, cast away all his worries, and didn't need to experience the tribulations of life and death. It was so simple to get along with each other, and when he was in the mood, he would draw his sword and prove it with his sword. Relaxed, unprecedentedly relaxed. The days passed quietly in this kind of relaxation. Every little bit left a deep impression, turning into an eternal memory. It was like a brand that was engraved into his bones and heart, unknowingly entering the depths of his divine sense. This day, Chern Zong had been in the Star's Sword Palace for half a year. In this half a year, everything in the outside world had nothing to do with him. His thoughts were focused on comprehending his sword techniques, improving his cultivation level, and interacting with the ancient Phoenix goddess bit by bit. His sword techniques had improved significantly. However, although he had talked about Yunyanxin, the ancient Phoenix goddess still couldn't remember it. However, there was a good sign. The ancient Phoenix goddess seemed to be able to recall some fragmented memories, but every time she recalled something, she would feel uncomfortable. Chern Zong also consulted the Star's Sword Master. After the Star's Sword Master checked, he came to the conclusion that her original memories had been sealed, and he couldn't break this seal. It wasn't that it couldn't be broken, but if it was forcibly broken, it would injure her divine sense, and the consequences would be very serious. Only the person who had placed the seal could break it. Through the aura of the seal, the Star's Sword Master came to the conclusion that the person who had placed the seal was the ancient Phoenix ancestor of the ancient Phoenix Mountain. In other words, only the ancient Phoenix ancestor could break it. This was not good news. After all, Chern Zong had interacted with the power clone of the ancient Phoenix ancestor before. In fact, it could be said that they had fought fiercely, and in the end, he had destroyed it. Although it was a power clone, it actually contained the intelligence and consciousness of the ancient Phoenix ancestor. Being so violent also meant that the ancient Phoenix ancestor himself was like this. Added with the fact that it was a saint beast, and not a human, it was completely different, and even more difficult to deal with. Of course, no matter how difficult it was to deal with, it wasn't enough to be the reason Chern Zong didn't break the seal. However, the ancient Phoenix goddess also knew the temperament of the ancient Phoenix ancestor, so she didn't plan to go to the ancient Phoenix Mountain now. At the very least, she had to have the strength to resist the ancient Phoenix ancestor. As for asking the Star's Sword Master for help, the Star's Sword Master was very busy. He had been constantly chasing after the whereabouts of the Sea Realm's worshipping sect, so he didn't have the time and energy to do so. Moreover, this had nothing to do with the Star's Sword Master. There is another way to break the seal, and that is to break the seal on your own. This was the original words of the Star's Sword Master before he left, and it was also the method that the ancient Phoenix goddess wanted to try. Chapter 3077. In the Starry Sword Palace, outside a cave, Chern Zong stood still with a cold and solemn expression. A powerful aura erupted at that moment and swept out in all directions. In an instant, the invisible and powerful aura swept past and filled the surroundings in an instant. It suppressed everything and covered a radius of 100,000 square meters. Starlight appeared and flickered. There were as many as 10,000 stars. Then, a bright moon quietly condensed and sprinkled moonlight. When the bright moon appeared, the pressure within 100,000 square meters increased several times and became more and more shocking. It was as if everything was being suppressed. Under the faint moonlight, the invisible sword power spread in all directions and permeated everything. Afterwards, the moon expanded and the gloomy white luster rapidly changed. It turned red before being dyed with a sliver of gold. The golden-red color was like a huge blazing fireball, releasing extremely scorching light and heat. It turned into a shocking sword might that swept out in an extremely brutal and violent manner. It was upright and overbearing. Scorching sun. The fifth level of the prodigious astral sword art. Thousands of stars disappeared, and the bright moon turned into a scorching sun that hung in the sky and shone in all directions. The extremely intense light filled the area within 100,000 square meters. It was the overbearing sword power that overflowed and was extremely majestic, crushing and burning everything. Great Path Domain. Chernzong's cultivation path was different from other cultivators. The outer universe was equivalent to the Great Path Domain. But now, Chernzong had cultivated the prodigious astral sword art and comprehended the fifth level. It was equivalent to mastering the astral sword realm, which was the true Great Path Domain. Immediately, Chernzong released the inner universe. Thousands of stars appeared in all directions, and a galaxy surrounded by 13 planets appeared. A silver-white cold light swept through the sky like divine thunder, releasing an extremely sharp aura. Immediately, the scorching sun of the fifth level of the prodigious astral sword art and the star that Taihao had transformed into in the inner universe approached each other and then merged into one. In an instant, shocking light and heat burst out, burning everything. The terrifying scorching sun sword power also doubled in an instant. Suppress. The astral sword field from the fifth level of the prodigious astral myriad sword art was instantly superimposed with the astral sword field released from the inner universe, doubling its power. Regardless of whether it was the astral sword or the innerverse, they were all equivalent to a Great Path Domain. When superimposed, their might would multiply, even surpassing the superimposed Great Path Domains of two great saints of the same origin. It was even more terrifying. Chernzong couldn't help but smile as he withdrew his inner universe and dispersed his astral sword domain. Even stronger, coupled with the power of the sea-suppressing pearl, it would become even more tyrannical, could almost run amok in the great saint realm. However, when he thought of the strength of a divine ancestor, the smile on Chernzong's face immediately disappeared. It was still not enough. Even with the enhancement of the stellar sword field, he still couldn't contend with a divine ancestor. At most, he could only struggle a little. There was still a long way to go before he could contend against the sacred ancestor. In half a year, his cultivation hadn't improved significantly. At the level of the innerverse, it was increasingly difficult to improve. Even if Chernzong wanted to, he couldn't be in a hurry. On this day, Chernzong and Yunyanxin practiced swordsmanship again. Rather than calling it a practice, it was better to say that Chernzong was guiding Yunyanxin to comprehend swordsmanship on his own and constantly improve. During this process, Chernzong was also comprehending swordsmanship, finding out the shortcomings of the past and improving it, thus further perfecting it. Tall buildings were built from the ground. Only by laying an incomparably solid foundation could one build taller floors without collapsing. Otherwise, when one continued to build taller and taller floors, after putting them into use, a loophole or flaw left behind in the foundation would cause the tall building to become unstable or even directly crack and collapse. That would be a tragedy. Elder Chen, Please come to the Celestial Great Hall. The voice of the Celestial Sword Palace's palace master sounded somewhat dignified. Nianxin, wait for me here. Chen Zong immediately said to Yu Nianxin. Although Yu Nianxin hadn't recovered her memories yet, all signs and information indicated that she was indeed Yu Nianxin, the Yu Nianxin whose memories had been sealed by the ancient Phoenix Patriarch. Moreover, in the past 6 months, she had been getting along very well with Chen Zong. She didn't resist being called Yu Nianxin at all. On the contrary, every time she was called that, there was an inexplicable joy that grew from the depths of her heart. In the Celestial Great Hall, the palace master and a group of elders were gathered here. They all looked dignified, which made Chen Zong secretly feel that something was wrong. Elder Chen, you're here. The palace master nodded immediately, and the other elders also greeted Chen Zong one after another. One had to know that the battle at the Vermilion Bird Holy Ground had already been made known to the other holy grounds. Therefore, they all knew that Chen Zong was a great sword saint who could somewhat contend with a divine ancestor. Chen Zong also returned the greeting and sat down. Elder Chen, this time I called you here because I hope you can help me with something, the Celestial Sword Palace's Star Sword Palace said seriously. The Star Sword Palace's palace master said seriously, the array formation of the Gate of Gods and Devils has been destroyed. The 5 Watchers have all disappeared. Chen Zong's expression suddenly changed when he heard this. Didn't that mean the divine demon realm had invaded again? When was it discovered? Chen Zong immediately asked, a sharp light flashing in his eyes. 3 days ago. The Celestial Sword Palace's palace master looked dignified. Judging from the traces, the spirit array was destroyed half a year ago. This was undoubtedly terrible news. The spirit array was destroyed half a year ago, and it was only discovered 3 days ago. What did this mean? It meant that the divine demon realm had most likely crossed over through the divine demon gate and invaded the ancient mystic world. However, in the past 6 months, there had been no news of the divine demon realm. Was it because the divine demon realm hadn't crossed over? The spirit array was undoubtedly destroyed by the divine demon realm, which meant that the divine demon realm had invaded, but there was no news of it. Obviously, the divine demon realm had learned from the previous experience and had chosen to lie low and develop silently. Gods and demons needed faith. As long as they could obtain faith and the power of faith, they could stay in the ancient profound world forever without any drawback. In fact, if they could obtain enough power of faith, they could even improve themselves further. Thus, it could be inferred that the divine demon realm had crossed over half a year ago and directly chose to lie low in the ancient mystic world. It was very likely that they had quietly developed faith, took root, and waited until they had accumulated to a certain extent before erupting and seizing the ancient mystic world. If by that time the divine demon realm would have been established, and it would be a great disaster for the ancient mystic world. Half a year's time sounded very short, and it would be over with a little seclusion. However, half a year's time could also cause some changes, big changes. In half a year's time, the divine demon realm that had invaded the ancient mystic world might have quietly developed. The purpose of the Starry Sword Palace master looking for Chen Zong was very simple, and that was to set out to investigate and find the whereabouts of the divine demon realm. Once they were found, they would be killed immediately. Of course, apart from Chen Zong, a portion of the others had to be set out, while the rest stayed behind to prevent the divine demon realm from invading their base camp. Chen Zong was at the level of a great sword saint, and his strength was very strong. If he set out and found the divine demon realm, he could deal with it immediately and kill it. Moreover, Chen Zong had the battle record of fighting against a divine ancestor. Even if he was not a match for the divine ancestor, he could still escape if he wanted to. Moreover, the divine demon realm was very strong, and the weakest was at the level of a demigod, which was equivalent to the level of a quasi-saint. Cultivators below the level of a quasi-saint would not have the slightest resistance against them and would be easily killed. The strength of the divine demon realm was even stronger, and was equivalent to the level of a demigod, or even stronger than a demigod of the same level. Therefore, ordinary cultivators would not be able to contend against the divine demon realm. However, it was not useless. For example, they could issue a mission and ask their disciples to set out and search for any abnormalities. The divine demon realm needed faith, so there must be people who believed in them. This was a sign. After finding such a sign, they would report it to the sect, and the sect would send out demigod saints to verify it. If it was true, it would be equivalent to completing the mission and they would be rewarded. If it was false, there would naturally be no reward. After all, the number of demigod saints was still very limited. Relying on demigod saints alone to search for the divine demon realm's traces would undoubtedly take a lot of time. Time was very important, and every day they delayed was equal to another day the divine demon realm developed. Perhaps one more day did not mean much, but the accumulation of one more day would be very shocking. As for whether the disciples would suffer any losses while searching for the divine demon realm's traces, that was also unavoidable. To resist the invasion of the divine demon realm, even a demigod saint would fall, let alone a non-saint saint. This time around, the master of Star Sword Palace had asked Chunzong to take action. Not only did he want Chunzong to search for the divine demon realm's traces, but his disciples had also discovered something that seemed to be the traces of the divine demon realm's development of faith. Hence, demigod saints were required to take action. Hearing what the master of Star Sword Palace said, Chunzong did not hesitate and immediately agreed. He informed Yun Yenshin, but Yun Yenshin requested to go with him. She was also a demigod saint with the power of demigod saint realm. On top of that, she had the upper sacred weapon, Qing Huang sword with her. In half a year, her swordsmanship had improved tremendously. Her power was not weak at demigod saint realm. Under normal circumstances, it would not be a problem for her to protect herself. Moreover, the invasion of the divine demon realm was definitely not a small matter. No demigod saints from ancient Xian world could avoid it. Sooner or later, they would have to fight. Hence, it was best for Yun Yenshin to come in contact with it. After all, with her going along, they could better ensure their safety. The two of them did not delay and immediately set off. They left Star Sword Palace and flew towards their destination at an extremely fast speed. Two sword lights streaked across the sky side by side. Chunzong covered Yun Yenshin with the power of his inner universe and carried Yun Yenshin to fly at an even faster speed. Otherwise, Yun Yenshin was only a small sword saint. In terms of speed, there was a huge difference between her and Chunzong, who was a great sword saint. The situation was urgent and they naturally had to rush over as soon as possible to ascertain the situation. If it was really a divine demon, they would have to kill it. That location was also within the 10,000 sword ancient realm. It was a relatively remote place and was a city called the Moon Sword City. It was a small city, similar to the Green Sword City. The more remote a small city was, the more beneficial it was for divine demons to develop their belief system and stabilize their foundation. The more remote a small city was, the less contact it had with the outside world and the fewer experts there were. Hence, it was easier for them to develop their belief system and control it. It was also harder for them to be discovered by the outside world. With Chunzong's full speed, even if he brought Yun Yenshin along, there would not be any hindrance. Very soon, they arrived at Moon Sword City. Chapter 3078. In the Moon Sword City, the night retreated and the morning sun rose. The light illuminated the eastern horizon, symbolizing the arrival of a new day. In a small city, there were many cultivators, but there were even more ordinary people. Ordinary people needed to live, so they had to get up early to work in exchange for a meager amount of money to support themselves and their families. The shops opened and began to accept customers from all over. At the city gate, there were farmers carrying hoes and caravans entering. The entire city seemed to have woken up. At this time, there were scattered people walking towards the city gate. After walking out of the city gate, they quickly ran towards the valley not far away. These people were clearly not ordinary people, and all of them were very fast. As they neared the mountain valley, traces of energy began to emanate from their bodies. The green energy was like a gust of wind that continuously swept out. However, it did not leave their bodies. Instead, it revolved around them, causing their speed to increase by several times. Two figures walked on the not-so-wide street of the Moon Sword City. It was a man and a woman. The man was handsome, but the most important thing was not his handsomeness, but an indescribable temperament. It was as vast as the sea, as deep as the abyss, as high as the sky, as if the heaven and earth could contain everything. As for the woman, not only was she beautiful, her temperament was also very unique. There was a kind of bright and beautiful feeling in her quick-witted eyes. Between her eyes there was a bright and beautiful feeling, but it did not flow into the world of mortals. This man and woman were Chunzong and Yunyenshin. They arrived at the Moon Sword City with the fastest speed possible. Because the disciples of the Star Sword Palace found some strange signs in the Moon Sword City, they reported it. Chunzong and Yunyenshin quickly came to investigate. Upon arriving at the Moon Sword City, Yunyenshin did not feel anything, but Chunzong immediately felt it. He felt that the aura here was a little strange, and this was because Chunzong's cultivation was high and his perception was astonishing. Furthermore, Chunzong had killed a few gods and devils before, so he was very familiar with them. Indeed, there was the smell of a god and devil. The disciples of Star Sword Palace did not make a mistake. There were indeed traces of a god in the Moon Sword City. However, this god did not stay within the Moon Sword City, but it should not be too far away. There might even be believers of the god in the Moon Sword City. The next step was to find the god-fiend. However, if a god was hiding, it would not be easy to find him. Perhaps he could start with the believers. It would be relatively simple to find the believers, and then let the believers find the god. Chunzong and Yunyenshin walked on the street. It looked like they were shopping, but Chunzong's immemorial heart force had already quietly spread out. The mixed Yuan heart force was a fusion of Chunzong's essence, spirit, divine thoughts, mind, and other powers. It was a very profound and mysterious power. Not only could this power be used to attack, it could also be used to defend, and it could also be used to investigate. It could be said to have many uses, and it would not fall into mediocrity because of this. The mixed Yuan heart force did not belong to the path of cultivation of this world. It was a power that belonged to Chunzong's unique path of cultivation. Therefore, it was even harder to detect. With Chunzong's cultivation of the inner universe, the moment the mixed Yuan heart force spread out, it was like an invisible net that covered the entire Moon Sword City. Everything was under the cover of Chunzong's mixed Yuan heart force. Countless information emerged one after another, gathering from all directions like a torrent and pouring into Chunzong's mind. Chunzong's expression did not change in the slightest. It was as if the torrent of information that could destroy the spirit of a quasi-sage was as fine as a breeze, unable to affect his spirit in the slightest. Chunzong also used an astonishing speed to distinguish the various kinds of information within the information, looking for the god and devil's believers. While perceiving and distinguishing, Chunzong also chatted with Yunyenshin, looking like a couple going out on a trip. It was very pleasant. Shortly after, Yunyenshin bought 2 sticks of candied haws. She passed 1 stick to Chunzong and kept the other stick for herself. Her face was full of smiles like a carefree little girl. This feeling was very wonderful. It made Chunzong involuntarily recall the short period of time when he was still in the void many years ago. Eating the candied haws and feeling the sweetness spread in his mouth, Chunzong's face also had traces of a smile. He looked at Yun Yanxin and smiled. It was as if the scene from several hundred years ago had overlapped. Suddenly, a cold light flashed in the depths of Chunzong's eyes. He directly gave Yun Yanxin a look. Yun Yanxin immediately understood. The two slightly adjusted their direction and headed in the direction of the city gate. When they came, the two of them flew directly to a certain place in the Moon Sword City. With their abilities, it was very easy for them to not be discovered. The two of them picked up their speed and silently did not attract the attention of others. Very soon, they arrived at the city gate and immediately stepped out of the city gate. Chunzong's eyes focused again. He seemed to see traces of the power of the god and devil spreading outwards. This was clearly the trace of the power of the god and devil. Although it was very weak, and if it was other saint-level experts, they probably wouldn't be able to sense it. However, Chunzong's perception ability was too strong. In particular, his perception of the power of the god and devil was even better than that of a divine ancestor. With such strong and fine perception, and having fought with the god and devil many times, his understanding of the god and devil surpassed many saint-level experts. This was why the palace master of the Star's Sword Palace asked Chunzong to help. Of course, others didn't know that Chunzong's perception of the power of the god and devil was so strong. Just the traces of some believers were so weak that other saint-level experts couldn't sense them. However, Chunzong was able to detect them. Silently, the two of them quickly approached the valley. Yun Yanxin didn't know much about the god and devil and had never faced one before. Therefore, he wasn't clear. However, Chunzong felt it more and more clearly. The god and devil were there. They were hiding in the valley. They had restrained their power, developed their faith, and stood firm. They were waiting for the right time to erupt. However, they were still discovered. They were discovered by Chunzong. Mixed Yuan heart force swept past like a breeze. In an instant, it filled the entire valley. Nothing could hide. Very quickly, Chunzong locked onto the location of the god and devil. It was located in the depths of the valley. Moreover, it was located in an underground cave. The god and devil were hiding behind a 10-meter-tall statue. In front of the statue, there were hundreds of people kneeling and worshipping. Hundreds of people were nothing to the Moon Sword City. Although the Moon Sword City was only a small city, it had a population of 1 to 200,000. Hundreds of people were only a small part of the population. Traces of aura emanated from these hundreds of people and entered the statue. The statue seemed to be flickering with a light that was hard to see with the naked eye. The power of faith. That was the power of faith. Bringing Yun Yanxin with him, Chunzong directly stepped into the underground cave. A tyrannical sword intent directly locked onto the statue. Chunzong and Yun Yanxin's arrival was completely unknown to the hundreds of people. However, the god and devil knew. Explode. In that instant, the god fiend exploded out, and the 10-meter-tall statue directly shattered, turning into countless fragments that shot out. Each fragment contained shocking power as they mercilessly shot out. A portion of the believers were immediately hit and pierced through without being able to resist at all. Their bodies were pierced, and they instantly died. The god and devil did not show any mercy just because they were believers. It was as if they were slaughtering chickens. However, even more fragments that carried an extremely terrifying power of the god and devil shot towards Chunzong and Yun Yanxin. It was as if they could shatter the void. The power was extremely terrifying. Chunzong did not draw his sword. This was only a god and devil. To him, it was not a threat at all. With a casual shake of his hand, he suddenly waved his sleeve, causing a gust of wind. The sword chi in the gust of wind was vast and mighty, instantly shattering all the fragments that shot towards him. This move immediately caused the god and devil's expression to change greatly. Without any hesitation, he rolled up a black light and immediately rushed towards the other direction of the cave. The black spear in his hand spun violently like a drill, drilling directly into the mountain wall and breaking through the earth. "Nianxin, I'll let you practice," Chunzong said with a smile. "Okay." Yu Nianxin immediately responded. She directly drew her sword. The Qing Huang's sword immediately burned and filled the air with a blazing aura. Her figure flashed, and like a fire phoenix, she flew directly towards the god and devil with her long sword. An ear-piercing cry suddenly sounded. The fire phoenix flew across the sky and attacked in an instant. The tip of the sword was like the phoenix's mouth, easily piercing the void. The mystery of swordsmanship was completely revealed in this sword move. This swordsmanship was a very strong swordsmanship of the ancient Phoenix Mountain. It was called the Holy Phoenix swordsmanship. Of course, it could not be compared to the supreme secret swordsmanship like the stellar myriad sword art. However, it was also an inheritance that was second only to the supreme secret swordsmanship. It was also considered to have amazing power. Yu Nianxin attacked the god and Chen Zong guarded her to prevent any accidents from happening. This time, since they wanted to kill the god and devil, they also wanted to let Yu Nianxin personally fight with the god and devil. She wanted to see the power of the god and devil with her own eyes, so that when she encountered the god and devil in the future, she would not be caught off guard due to her lack of experience in a life-and-death battle. The god and devil were equivalent to the pristine saint realm, but overall they would be stronger than the pristine saint realm. However, this was not absolute. Some powerful pristine saint realm could still contend with or even suppress the god and devil. Yu Nianxin's talent in swordsmanship was not bad. With Chen Zong's guidance, she had already cultivated the Holy Phoenix swordsmanship to a very profound level. In addition to her good cultivation base and the support of the sacred grade bloodline, she was not weak in the pristine saint realm. In the land region of the ancient mysterious world, bloodline was the most important. Although there were some experts who did not have any bloodline, it was still the world of bloodline after all. Moreover, not all sacred grade experts had the sacred grade bloodline. Generally speaking, as long as one had the heavenly grade bloodline, there was hope to break through to the sacred grade. If one had a bloodline below the heavenly grade, there was no hope to break through to the sacred grade. As for the sacred grade experts who had the sacred grade bloodline, their strength would naturally be more powerful, especially after the power of the bloodline was stimulated. Fight. Seeing that he could not escape, the god and devil immediately erupted and turned around to counterattack. A black battle spear pierced through the air and directly smashed the void towards Yu Nianxin. It was so ferocious that Yu Nianxin could not help but turn pale. She had relatively little experience in life and death battles. Chapter 3079. Fight. Inside the underground cave, Yu Nianxin and the demon were locked in a fierce battle. After a few months, she had gained hundreds of believers. Although the power of faith was not much, it was enough to maintain the demon in the ancient mystic world without weakening its strength. Yu Nianxin displayed the sacred phoenix swordsmanship to the extreme. Usually, when she sparred with Chen Zong would constantly give her pointers, improving and perfecting it further. Now, Yu Nianxin's sacred phoenix swordsmanship had surpassed the original version of ancient Phoenix Mountain and reached an even higher level. However, when Chen Zong and Yu Nianxin fought, it was really just a spar and not a battle of life and death. They would more or less hold back. Whether Yu Nianxin was in the original void, in the outer universe, or in the inner universe by chance to become the goddess of ancient Phoenix Mountain, she had experienced less life and death battles. She could not be considered a veteran of hundreds of battles. Compared to Chen Zong, she was far from it. She needed more training, and now was an excellent opportunity. Yu Nianxin was also very clear about this point. However, she was previously the goddess of ancient Phoenix Mountain and her status was very high. Whenever a battle broke out, she did not need to do it personally. Her subordinates were enough to deal with it, or they were afraid of the strength of ancient Phoenix Mountain and did not dare to offend her, so there were very few fighter jets. In the fierce battle of life and death with the demon, Yunyanxin was completely focused. Her essence, energy, and spirit were incomparably condensed and focused. The power of the sacred phoenix swordsmanship was also constantly stimulated. Every sword became more concise, but its power became more tyrannical. At first, Yunyanxin was at a disadvantage, and the demon had the upper hand. Its black spear was extremely tyrannical, and its power was terrifying. It beat Yunyanxin until she was surrounded by danger. Chenzong still did not make a move. After all, he was only at a disadvantage, and was not in a life-and-death crisis. If he had to make a move just because he was at a disadvantage, it wouldn't be beneficial to Yunyanxin's training. Now Yunyanxin had unleashed the powerful might of the sacred phoenix swordsmanship. Every strike became more concise and more tyrannical, gradually turning the disadvantageous situation around. She began to be on par with this demon god, fighting fiercely without rest. As for the followers, many of them were killed or injured by the overflowing qi, but some of them still managed to escape. Chenzong did not intend to stop them. They were just a bunch of ignorant people who had been deceived. This demon god's attacks became more and more ruthless. Every move was fatal, but Yunyanxin was not anxious at all. She continued to use the sacred phoenix sword arts to counter, blocking all of her opponent's attacks. Every strike became more and more tyrannical, and the cries of the phoenix became more and more melodious and intense. The cries reverberated in all directions. The battle was extremely intense, but Chenzong had been standing at the side all this time. This gave the demon god even more pressure. Blazing Phoenix. Seizing the fleeting opportunity, Yunyanxin unleashed the sacred phoenix swordsmanship's ultimate skill. The green brilliance sword trembled, as if it had turned into a green phoenix burning with blazing flames. It instantly traversed the sky and bombarded the demon god. The terrifying high temperature boiled the air in the cave, and even the surrounding cave walls began to melt. Under the blazing high temperature, it also contained an extremely violent power. The demon god did not dare to take this blow head-on. Even if his demon god's body was extremely tyrannical, he would be injured if he took it head-on. There was another expert with unknown strength watching from the side. Once he was injured, it would be very disadvantageous for him. It had to be said that this demon god had taken the wrong path from the beginning. He had developed his faith in this underground cave, but there was only one exit. Now that he could not leave through the exit, it was not impossible to blast a way out, but it would take some time. That little bit of time was simply impossible to seize. Of course, if he knew Chenzong's strength, he would not have such thoughts. The strength of a great sword saint was not something he could contend against. If it weren't for the fact that Yunyanxin needed to temper herself, Chenzong would have been able to kill the righteous godfiend with a single strike. The righteous godfiend wouldn't even be able to withstand a single strike. The demon god's body was indeed very strong, but it was still lacking when compared to someone of the same level. Erupt, ancient phoenix bloodline. In an instant, a red light bloomed between Yunyanxin's eyebrows, condensing into the mark of a phoenix bathed in flames. His entire body was filled with an extremely shocking scarlet aura, dancing endlessly like scarlet ribbons. Soon after, they gathered behind Yunyanxin and transformed into a pair of scarlet phoenix wings, causing Yunyanxin's speed to increase. As his speed increased, the blazing power contained in each of his sword strikes also increased by several times. His strength increased explosively. Blazing Phoenix. Skyward. Sky burning. One move after another, each move was more powerful than the previous one. It was terrifying to the extreme. The entire mountain of sand and rocks in the cave melted, and the corpses of the believers were also scorched black. It was the same inside and outside, and they were directly turned into charcoal. Strong. Extremely strong. After activating the ancient phoenix bloodline, Yunyanxin's strength became even more astonishing. She unleashed her 3 ultimate moves in succession, directly suppressing the fiend god and forcing him to retreat repeatedly. It was simply impossible for the fiend god to resist. The terrifying power blasted into the fiend god's body, wantonly burning and destroying it. If it wasn't for the fact that the fiend god's body was extremely tyrannical, it was afraid that he wouldn't have been able to resist and would have been burned to ashes. Even so, the demon god could not help but spit out blood. The blood he spat out was shockingly hot, as if it was not blood but magma. When it landed on the ground, it immediately burned a hole in the ground and crystallized all around. The 4th move, Descent of the Holy Phoenix. This was the strongest move of the Holy Phoenix swordsmanship. It gathered all of Yun Yenshin's terrifying power and directly shot down from the sky, transforming into a golden red phoenix. It was dozens of meters in size and was extremely condensed. The power it carried was extremely terrifying, as if it could destroy the world and incinerate everything. This move was unreserved and merciless. The demon god's expression changed greatly. His battle spear erupted, and black light surged like a violent tide. He did not dodge at all. It was difficult to dodge in this cave, so he could only face it head-on. With a boom, the black light surged forward like a raging wave, crushing mountains with an incomparably shocking momentum. It carried with it the resolve of a fiend god, the resolve to face death. Even if he died, he would drag someone down with him. Chen Zong's expression changed slightly. The mixed Yuan heart force enveloped him, ready to attack at any time. Although he wanted to let Yun Yenshin temper herself, he could not let her be injured. It would be fine if she was lightly injured, but if she was seriously injured, it would be very troublesome. However, in an instant, the golden red phoenix, which was tens of meters long, suddenly turned and spun at an astonishing speed. The speed of its descent also increased in an instant, and its might became even more terrifying. It was as if all of its power had been fused into its mouth as it struck down, and the void was completely torn apart. The golden red light and the black light came into contact in an instant and then collided. In an instant, an extremely terrifying power erupted. In an instant, the void seemed to have solidified. In the next breath, the force of a tsunami erupted and swept in all directions. It was unstoppable. The cave wall was bombarded again, and countless cracks appeared and fell down. The golden red phoenix shattered, and Yun Yenshin flew backward. The black light dissipated, and the demon god's body was covered with cracks. Blood flowed out, and she knelt on the ground. Her breath was weak, and she seemed to have lost the ability to resist. But at the same time, the descent of the Holy Phoenix had also exhausted Yun Yenshin's cultivation power. She could not attack again in a short period of time. This demon god was still alive. The strength of the demon god's body was indeed very terrifying. Chen Zong also noticed that although the demon god's injuries were very serious, they were recovering at an astonishing speed. In addition to the tyrannical strength of the demon god's body, the power of faith also played a big role. The power of faith could allow the demon god to take root in the ancient mysterious world. When the power of faith was strong enough, it could also increase the demon god's power and heal injuries. Yun Yenshin also noticed that the demon god's injuries were recovering rapidly, and his breath was also growing rapidly. Her expression changed slightly. Relatively speaking, her recovery speed was not as fast as the demon god's. This made Yun Yenshin realize how difficult it was to deal with a demon god. "Let me do it," Chen Zong said to Yun Yenshin with a smile and immediately drew his sword. Since Yun Yenshin had exhausted her cultivation, it was not suitable for her to attack again. Of course, if she was alone and had no choice but to attack, she could only burn her blood in exchange for an instant of power. But that would hurt her own blood, which was very disadvantageous to her. Now that Chen Zong was on the side, he would definitely not let Yun Yenshin do so. The moment the heavenly will sword was unsheathed, it directly streaked across the void. It silently cut a sword mark and pointed directly at the demon god. Fast. Not only was this sword subtle, but it was also extremely fast. It was sword one of the wholehearted sword arts. It was like a shooting star, like a cold bolt of lightning across the sky. It seemed to be straight, but there was a slight trajectory. The demon god's expression suddenly changed, but he could not dodge. His injuries were recovering rapidly, but it would be difficult for him to fully recover in a short period of time. Chen Zong had the strength of a great sword saint and was extremely tyrannical. Once he attacked, he had no intention of holding back. One sword to kill. The demon god could not dodge or resist. In just an instant, the space between his eyebrows was directly pierced. The terrible sword will directly blasted into his mind and wantonly destroyed it. When Chen Zong pulled the sword out, he also pulled out the divinity. This was the most fatal. With the divinity, the demon god had the possibility of resurrection. It was easy to resurrect as long as they had faith, but if they lost the divinity, they would die without doubt. After killing with one sword, Chen Zong looked at Yu Nianxin with the divinity. Nianxin, let me refine this divinity first. When my strength is raised to the extreme and enough to contend with the divine ancestor, I will take you to ancient Phoenix Mountain to break the seal and restore your memory. Okay. Yu Nianxin did not hesitate at all. The divinity of the demon god was of great use, and one of them was to raise one's cultivation. When Chen Zong was in the inner world, he had used the divinity to quickly raise the cultivation of the inner world from the entry level to the completion level of the inner world. The time it took was not long. If he cultivated by himself, it would take a long time. Now, the innerverse realm was much more powerful than the inner world realm. It was difficult to raise it in half a year. Chen Zong estimated that it would take decades to raise the innerverse realm from the entry level to the small success level. However, the divinity might be able to shorten this time by a large margin. As such, the divinity was very important. Chapter 3080. The effect of a single strand of divinity on me has already become very weak. Above the sky, 2 streaks of sword light flew past. Chen Zong frowned slightly and thought to himself. When he was in his inner world, a strand of divinity was enough to raise his inner world from beginner to small success or even large success. The effect was very shocking, but now, Chen Zong's inner world had refined that strand of divinity in just 3 breaths of time. After refining it, his inner world's cultivation had indeed increased, and the mixed Yuan heart force had become stronger, but it was very limited. If he wanted to make a comparison, it was roughly equivalent to his own cultivation results for a year. After refining and absorbing a strand of divinity, the improvement was equivalent to his own cultivation results for a year. Was it more or less? Compared to the improvement in his inner world, it was naturally less and very little. The improvement was too minute, but compared to his own cultivation, it was a lot. Absorbing a strand of divinity with 2 flowers was equivalent to his own cultivation results for a year. 10 strands of divinity were equivalent to 10 years of cultivation result. If there were 100 strands of divinity, then it would be 100 years of cultivation result. If he could obtain dozens of strands of divinity to refine and absorb, perhaps his cultivation would be able to jump from beginner to small success in the inner world, and his strength would improve significantly in a short period of time. However, it was not easy to obtain dozens of strands of divinity in a short period of time. However, the invasion of the godfiends might be a good opportunity. A strand of divinity was equivalent to a year of cultivation result. Thinking about it, Chen Zong felt that it was not bad. Using a special treasure, he contacted Starry Sword Palace and informed them that the godfiends in Moon's Word City had been killed. Chen Zong asked if they had found any other abnormalities, but unfortunately, the godfiends were hidden very deeply. Even if many disciples of Starry Sword Palace searched everywhere, they could not find much. Moon's Word City was one, and there were a few in other places. They had already been verified and dealt with by the other saints of Starry Sword Palace. After that, Chernzong and Yunyenshin didn't return to the Stellar Sword Palace, nor did they go to the ancient Phoenix Mountain. Instead, they cultivated and scouted for information, looking for signs of the demon god. If they were lucky, they might be able to find the whereabouts of the demon god. Unfortunately, even though Chernzong's mixed Yuan heart force was superb, it was difficult for him to find the whereabouts of the gods and demons without a clear target. Perhaps the gods and demons also knew that the cultivators of the ancient profound world were constantly searching for them, so they hid even deeper. Now, it was the incubation period for the divine demons. Once the incubation period was over, the divine demons would show themselves and launch an attack to invade the ancient profound world. Therefore, they had to take advantage of the time when the celestial demon was in hiding to find them and kill them. This would weaken the strength of the celestial demon camp and delay the eruption of the celestial demon camp. At the same time, it would also increase the strength of the cultivators of the ancient profound world. When they were strong and the enemy was weak, even if the celestial demon camp really launched a large-scale invasion, it would be resisted. Time flew, and in the blink of an eye, 3 months had passed. Chernzong and Yunyenshin wandered around the myriad sword ancient domain, searching, but they still couldn't find any signs of the demon god. However, in these 3 months, the two swordsmanship had improved further, and their strength had improved to a certain extent. Suddenly, Chernzong received a message from the Stellar Sword Palace. His expression changed, and he immediately turned around with Yunyenshin and flew away at top speed. The message from the Stellar Sword Palace indicated that they had found traces of the demon god. Moreover, it was 100% certain because they had lost a sword saint expert. The process of searching and killing the demon god also put them in danger. In the process of putting oneself in danger, the demon god wasn't a small animal like a rabbit or a pheasant that could be killed easily. On the contrary, it was an existence that was stronger than cultivators. Demons of the same level were often stronger than cultivators. Therefore, when cultivators wanted to kill the demon god, they also had to bear the risk of being killed. Now, the Stellar Sword Palace had lost a sword saint expert. The loss was not small, but there was nothing they could do about it. The good news was that Star Sword Palace had successively killed 2 principal god-level fiend gods and injured 1 spiritual god-level fiend god. However, the injured spiritual god-level fiend god had gone into hiding, and no one knew where it had gone. The death of a sword saint meant that they had to mobilize a great sword saint. However, the number of great sword saints in the Stellar Sword Palace was very limited. At least 2 of them had to stay behind to guard the Stellar Sword Palace to prevent sneak attacks. Chernzong happened to be searching for the demon god outside, so he was the most suitable person to take action. Chernzong didn't hesitate at all. He immediately accepted and set off. The place where the sword saint of the Stellar Sword Palace died was outside the Myriad Sword Ancient Domain. It was a small domain adjacent to the Myriad Sword Ancient Domain. It was a small domain called the Descending Sword Domain, and it was quite close to the Myriad Sword Ancient Domain. The Descending Sword Domain was only a small domain. However, due to the influence of the Myriad Sword Ancient Domain, there were many sword cultivators in this domain. The sword Dao was also quite prosperous. Of course, it was far from being comparable to the Myriad Sword Ancient Domain. In the entire Descending Sword Domain, there was only 1 pristine Saint Sword cultivator. He was the strongest person in the Descending Sword Domain. Chernzong was extremely fast. He quickly flew across the Myriad Sword Ancient Domain and arrived at the Descending Sword Domain. He immediately felt that the Sword Dao aura of the Descending Sword Domain had dropped by a large level. It couldn't be compared to the Myriad Sword Ancient Domain at all. Of course, if the Sword Dao aura of the Descending Sword Domain could be compared to the Myriad Sword Ancient Domain, the strength of the Descending Sword Domain would be even more powerful. It wouldn't just be a small domain, but a major domain. In fact, the trace of the divine demon wasn't discovered by the disciples of the Stellar Sword Palace. It was discovered by the only sword saint of the descending sword domain, the Lightning Sword Saint. He and the other sword saint of the Stellar Sword Palace investigated and fought together. In the end, one of them died and the other was injured. The one who died was the sword saint of the Stellar Sword Palace, and the one who was injured was the Lightning Sword Saint. The Lightning Sword Saint had used a secret technique to escape. In addition, the divine demon was afraid of being found by other experts, so he gave up the chase and hid himself. That was how the Lightning Sword Saint managed to survive. When Chunzong arrived at the descending sword domain, he went straight to the Lightning Sword Saint. The Lightning Sword Saint wasn't alone. He was the sect master of the Lightning Sword Sect, the #1 heaven-class force in the descending sword domain. When Chunzong arrived, the Lightning Sword Saint immediately welcomed him. His face was pale and his breath was weak. It was obvious that he hadn't recovered from his injuries. Soon after, the Lightning Sword Saint explained everything in detail. Chunzong listened carefully, and his eyes seemed to sparkle endlessly. After that, the Lightning Sword Saint personally led Chunzong and Yunyanxin to the place where the divine demon was found. It was a mountain, a black mountain. It was called Blacksword Mountain. Deep inside Blacksword Mountain, Chunzong sensed carefully. Indeed, he felt the residual aura of the divine demon. A divine demon had indeed appeared here. Finally, the three of them arrived at the deepest part of Blacksword Mountain. "It's here," said the Lightning Sword Saint. The Lightning Sword Saint said. The surroundings were filled with sword scars and other broken traces. The sword scars were filled with the aura of the Star's Sword Dao and the Lightning Sword Dao, while the remaining traces contained the aura of the Fiend God. Indeed, this was the place where the two sword saints and the divine demon had clashed. From this, it could be determined that this Fiend God was a principal god, No matter how strong the divine demon was, Chunzong could deal with it. He could let Yunyanxin fight a fierce battle first to hone Yunyanxin's strength and experience in life and death battles. At that time, if he couldn't beat the divine demon, he would step in. Search. Chunzong began to release the mixed Yuan heart force and searched continuously. The mixed Yuan heart force was extraordinary, and it was perfect for searching for clues. Not long after, Chunzong found the traces left behind by the divine demon. Although they were very subtle, so subtle that other great saints couldn't detect them, Chunzong still found them. Chase. Without any hesitation, Chunzong took the lead, followed by Yunyanxin and the Lightning Sword Saint. They immediately chased after Chunzong. Although the Lightning Sword Saint's injuries hadn't healed, he was still a sword saint. His strength was still not bad. The divine demon was hiding, but hiding didn't mean that it had disappeared. However, Chunzong finally lost his target after a careful search. He couldn't feel the aura left behind by the divine demon's power. What's going on? Chunzong's eyes narrowed slightly. He immediately looked around, but he couldn't find anything. Peerless Sword Saint, does this divine demon have some unusual means to hide himself? The Lightning Sword Saint thought for a while and said, like some unique alternate space treasure? Alternate space treasures were created to hide in an alternate space in the world, making it difficult for others to find. Moreover, it would also isolate all auras. If the divine demon had such a treasure, it was normal that it would be difficult to find it. However, alternate space treasures were relatively rare. It was hard to say whether the divine demon had one. Even if there was a treasure in another space, it would not be easy to find it. After a careful search, Chunzong, Yunyanxin, and the Lightning Sword Saint immediately split up and searched around. They were all saint-level powerhouses. Even if they encountered any danger, they wouldn't be killed immediately. They would be able to use their strength to resist and wait for the other two saint-level powerhouses to come to their aid. Moreover, Chunzong wasn't an ordinary sword saint. He was a great sword saint. Among the great sword saints, he was one of the more powerful ones. Even if he encountered a divine demon at the spiritual god level, Chen Zong could still fight. Under the power of the sea-suppressing orb, ordinary divine demons at the spiritual god level were no match for Chen Zong. They kept searching, digging 3 feet into the ground. "I found it!" The lightning sword saint's voice suddenly sounded. Chen Zong and Yu Nianxin reacted extremely quickly. In an instant, they exploded with extreme speed and rushed towards the lightning sword saint. Chen Zong's speed was faster, and he closed in immediately. His speed surprised the lightning sword saint. He was even faster than the lightning sword saint, and much faster. One had to know that the lightning sword saint specialized in the lightning sword Dao, and he specialized in speed. This peerless sword saint was indeed a great sword saint. Otherwise, he wouldn't be so fast. Shortly after, Yu Nianxin also flew over. "Peerless sword saint, Green Glory sword saint is here." The lightning sword saint immediately pointed to an empty space in front of them. He looked over and didn't find anything unusual. "I was born with sharp senses. When I was searching here, I felt something strange." The name Green Glory Sword Saint was given by Yu Nianxin herself. She was somewhat famous in the past few months. The reason why she was named Green Glory Sword Saint was because of the Green Glory Sword that Chen Zong gave her. Chapter 3081. The mixed Yuan Heart Force was fully released and condensed, directly covering the front. Bit by bit, Chen Zong finally sensed it. It was a completely different aura, but it was hidden very well. If the Lightning Sword Saint had not warned him, Chen Zong would not have been able to find it. Now that he had sensed it, it meant that he had a clearer target. After a while, Chen Zong's eyes flashed. He immediately drew his sword and slashed out. The sword light was earth-shattering, like a divine thunder tearing the world apart, directly slashing at the empty space in front of him. It was an extremely powerful slash, but its aura was completely restrained. It was silent and extremely fast. The slash did not miss. Instead, it seemed to have slashed at something. The sword light suddenly broke through and directly slashed a pitch-black crack. It was the crack of the alternate space. The alternate space treasure could create an alternate space and hide it. However, the strength of the alternate space was limited. A full blow from a pristine saint was enough to break it. Of course, those below the saint level did not have the strength to destroy it. The pitch-black crack was like a monster's open mouth, emitting a strange aura. That was the aura of the divine demon. Chen Zong did not rush into the alternate space. Instead, he waved his sword again, slashing out streaks of stunning sword light, immediately slashing at the void in front of him. All the slashes hit the alternate space, creating more cracks. Each crack was a few meters long, constantly expanding. The alternate space was indeed very strong, but it could not stop Chen Zong's sword. Yu Nianxin and the Lightning Sword Saint also successively helped and finally broke the alternate space. Suddenly, more divine demon aura surged out of the broken alternate space. Sure enough, the divine demon was hiding in the alternate space. In an instant, a sudden change occurred. A bolt of lightning suddenly flashed, and a dark blue, extremely terrifying aura suddenly bloomed in the alternate space. It instantly blasted out like an explosion, as if it was tearing the world apart and shattering everything. As soon as the dark blue lightning appeared, it suddenly split into a lightning net that covered Chen Zong and the other two. Its power was extremely terrifying. It was much more powerful than the divine demon that Yu Nianxin had fought previously. His strength was equivalent to the peak of the pristine saint stage. "Nianxin, I'll leave it to you." Chen Zong didn't have the slightest intention to attack again, and immediately withdrew. Yu Nianxin nodded. The cyan brilliance sword suddenly flashed, bringing with it an ear-piercing cry. It was as if a phoenix had spread its wings and flew out, bringing with it bursts of cyan phoenix flames that collided with the dark blue lightning. the lightning sword saint's body flashed, and he instantly turned into a bolt of lightning as he retreated rapidly, dodging the attack of the dark blue lightning. Green flames spread out and burned in all directions, turning into a sea of fire that burned incessantly. The figure of the green phoenix swept through the sea of fire, shattering the dark blue lightning one after another. However, Chernzong could see that Yunyenshin's strength in the pristine saint realm was still not enough. He had yet to reach the peak of the pristine saint realm. On the other hand, the divine demon was at the peak of the righteous god realm and was even stronger. However, it wouldn't be so easy for the divine demon to win. Yunyenshin's swordsmanship was getting better and better. Even if he couldn't defeat his opponent, he could still hold on for a period of time to hone himself and further explore his potential. As for the lightning sword saint, his injuries hadn't healed yet. In such a battle, he couldn't exert his full strength, so he might as well watch from the side. After all, there was a great grand sword saint, peerless sword saint guarding the side, so it wouldn't be his turn to attack. The divine demon's hands were wrapped in a dark blue lightning. It attacked Yunyenshin in a frenzy, displaying the superb martial arts of the divine demon. Every punch carried with it the terrifying power of thunder, shattering the vacuum and shattering the layers of flames. Yunyenshin activated the power of the ancient phoenix bloodline. Streaks of crimson flames fluttered, forming a pair of phoenix fire wings. Yunyenshin's speed increased dramatically. The sacred phoenix swordsmanship under the Qinghuang sword blazed fiercely. Under the Qinghuang sword, Yunyenshin's body and sword became one. He was like a flaming phoenix flying. His wings were like the edge of a sword, and his beak was like the tip of a sword. Chernzong stared. Once Yunyenshin was in great danger, he would immediately draw his sword. With his strength and speed, he would immediately attack the moment he drew his sword. He would instantly kill and rescue Yunyenshin from danger. An unexpected change occurred abruptly. Chernzong's eyes narrowed as he saw a wisp of black lightning silently shoot out from the depths of the damaged alternate space. It was very fast and very sudden. It was impossible to guard against it. The black lightning was as thick as a chopstick. Its tip pierced through the sky like the tip of a sword. It mercilessly attacked Yunyenshin, wanting to kill him in one blow. It was too fast. It was so fast that Yunyenshin couldn't react in time. She only felt a great sense of danger in an instant, and the shadow of death filled her heart. However, Yunyenshin didn't panic. Her expression only darkened slightly. She immediately attacked the righteous god-godfiend with her sword. As for the attack that couldn't be avoided, she directly ignored it. This was because she believed that someone would block that attack. Chernzong was extremely fast. He instantly drew his sword and executed the single-hearted sword technique with the profundity of the heavenly light sword drawing technique. No, it should be said that the profundity of the heavenly light sword drawing technique had long been integrated into the single-hearted sword technique. As soon as he drew his sword, its power would instantly increase by several times. Chernzong's superb senses allowed him to know how terrifying that black lightning was. It had completely surpassed the righteous god-godfiend realm and was at the spiritual god-godfiend realm. There was actually a righteous god-godfiend and a spiritual god-godfiend realm expert hiding in this alternate space. If it was a pristine saint realm expert, he would definitely die an unnatural death. Fortunately, Chernzong wasn't a pristine saint realm expert. He was a great sword saint and not an ordinary great sword saint. Single-hearted sword technique, Sword 5. Currently, the single-hearted sword technique had a total of 13 sword. It no longer required Sword 1 to continuously accumulate power. He could directly execute any one of the swords. It also possessed the power of Sword 1 as a foundation. In other words, when Chernzong directly executed Sword 5, it was as if he had unknowingly executed Sword 1 to Sword 4. The sword light tore through the air and pierced through everything. In an instant, the black lightning was struck and shattered. Even though the power of the sneak attack was extraordinary, it was weakened by the fact that it had to be executed silently. It couldn't block Chen Zong's sword. After Sword 5 shattered the black lightning, it brazenly charged in the direction where the black lightning came from like a hot knife through butter. Exclamations of surprise and bewilderment followed. In an instant, a second figure flew over. That figure transformed into a huge black lightning bolt. It was extremely fast and charged toward Chen Zong without any hesitation or mercy. A spiritual god-godfiend. A spiritual god-godfiend who had mastered the divine power of thunder. Two godfiends. This was beyond Chen Zong's expectations. However, it seemed to be a matter of course. If it was only a righteous god-godfiend, would he be able to kill one or severely injure the other under the joint attack of two sword saints? Although godfiends of the same level were usually stronger, a Saint Realm sword cultivator's battle strength wasn't weak either. In particular, the one who was killed was a Saint Realm sword cultivator from Star's Sword Palace. It was inconceivable. If the sword saint wanted to escape, he should be able to do so. Now that he saw this spiritual god-godfiend, Chen Zong understood why. A spiritual god-godfiend was equivalent to a great sword saint. Their strength was tyrannical. Coupled with a righteous god-godfiend expert, it wasn't difficult to kill or severely injure a sword saint. However, a second doubt suddenly popped up. Why wasn't the lightning sword saint killed? Why was he able to escape from a righteous god-godfiend and a spiritual god-godfiend expert? Instead, it was the more powerful sword saint from Star's Sword Palace who was killed? What was the reason for this? Was it because the lightning sword saint had mastered some unique life-saving technique? That was also possible. The spiritual god-godfiend attacked in an instant. The black lightning's power was extremely terrifying and shattered everything. He didn't show any mercy. Chen Zong's expression was solemn, but a cold glint bloomed in the depths of his eyes. He immediately unleashed his sword skills. Saber 9. A sword pierced through the air. Its power was much more tyrannical than Saber 5's. 2 against 2. Yun Yanxin fought fiercely with the righteous god-godfiend expert. Although he was at a disadvantage, he resisted with his superb sword skills and wouldn't be defeated for a while. Chen Zong, on the other hand, was locked in a fierce battle with the spirit god realm fiend god expert. Every strike of his was extremely profound, and it completely shattered the spirit god realm fiend god's black lightning. Chen Zong's advantage was extremely obvious as he directly suppressed the spirit god realm fiend god expert. Suppress. The spiritual god-godfiend's expression turned cold when he saw that he was at a disadvantage. A hint of determination flashed in his eyes. In an instant, the alternate space that had been slashed exploded and turned into a terrifying torrent that swept over. It swept across 3,000 kilometers with a majestic momentum. It was as if the sea was flowing backward and the sky was collapsing. In an instant, it completely covered the surroundings. The area within a radius of 100,000 meters was directly enveloped. Whether it was Chen Zong, Yun Yanxin, or the Lightning Sword Saint, they were all caught in it. A terrifying pressure erupted in an instant and charged toward Chen Zong like an invisible mountain. It was extremely terrifying. This was the final eruption of the broken alternate space treasure. If it wasn't broken, it could be used many times. However, now that it was broken, it could either be repaired and used again or it would be completely damaged after being used and couldn't be repaired. But now, he encountered Chen Zong, who possessed great strength and was considered a very strong existence among the spiritual gods. In this ancient profound world, he was definitely a well-known expert. Such experts were relatively rare. If he could kill him, he could further weaken the power of the ancient profound world. At that time, it would be easier to invade the ancient profound world when the time came. Exchanging a broken treasure for the life of a strong enemy and removing obstacles for future invasions was very worthwhile, even if alternate space treasures were relatively rare. Chenzong's expression couldn't help but change. This pressure was very tyrannical. In an instant, his body was suppressed and he couldn't move. The spiritual Godfiend expert also seized the opportunity to completely erupt. He blasted out a terrifying black lightning that was as thick as a thigh. This black lightning carried a terrifying aura that could destroy everything. It was as if it could shatter heaven and earth and destroy all things. It was as if it could shatter stars and worlds. Chenzong's expression didn't change. His mixed Yuan heart force suddenly erupted and his inner universe was also released in an instant. Immediately, the suppression of the broken alternate spaces power was supported and a true sun rose from his body. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.